conditions were unbearable. The man stood before the boss and listened to a harsh verdict. No bonuses, no raises, no promotions. His life had turned into an endless cycle of unpaid overtime, on average 160 hours a month and 4 sleepless nights a week for thankless work. A long, exhausted sigh. His name was Yamamoto Hiroshige. He was 38 years old. For 16 years straight, he pushed his body to the limit for the company, and after all that, he was just fired. Drift, he sat on a bench in the park and couldn't take his eyes off a strange sight. A huge tree whose roots and trunk entwined an entire skyscraper. A thought flashed through his mind: maybe he should try to become an explorer. But what exactly is an explorer? The answer was in the brochure he was reading while walking down the street. About 50 years ago, buildings worldwide suddenly turned into labyrinths filled with monsters. This phenomenon was called dungeonization. Those who dare to enter these dungeons are called explorers, because if they defeat the boss at the end, the building returns to normal. People from all walks of life go on these expeditions, some for treasures, others to take back the world or to test their strength. But is their dream really their choice? A cheerful video reinforced the brochure's message. On the screen appeared a girl with bright eyes and braids, who with contagious energy pointed forward and urged viewers to become explorers, and chase their own dream. When the video ended, a woman in a business suit addressed the room of future recruits, including Yamamoto, asked if there were any questions. Someone in the audience muttered about a suspicious line in the fine print of the video, but she quickly brushed it off and announced that registration was in the next room, pulling people there one after another, and Yamamoto was left stunned by the sudden bustle. The seminar leader ordered him to place his hand on a large stone tablet covered with ruins and state his name and age. He hesitated a little but complied and said, "Yamamoto Hiroshige, 38 years old." His hand rested on the cold stone, a drop of sweat rolled down his temple. He looked uncertainly at the instructor, asking if he was performing the action correctly. She responded with a bright, reassuring smile, saying he was doing everything perfectly and that they had other candidates his age. But inside, he felt a hint of pity in her words and thought she was just trying not to hurt his feelings. A little embarrassed after this conversation, he asked what to do next, and the instructor calmly prompted him to say the word status. It obediently complied, and at his command, the surface of the stone tablet flashed with light. A transparent screen appears in the air before him, clearly showing his personal data. Name: Yamamoto Hiroshige, race human, age 38, status normal, level 1, health and stamina full, but the skill section is empty. The instructor explains that only he can see this status screen, confirming that he is now officially a first-level researcher, and adds that to level up, he needs to defeat monsters and gain experience. The explanation moves to the most important part: skills. She says that although special powers usually come from years of training and natural talent, every new traveler starts with a few basic ones, and the quality of these initial skills, she emphasizes, is pure luck. She hints with a light, patronizing tone that even someone like him, whom she almost calls uncle, could be lucky and get a good starting skill, then asks him to read the skills from the list aloud. And he freezes, confused, silently pondering her casually dropped hint about his age. He musters his courage, his thoughts stubbornly focused on talent and what it will mean for his future. A drop of sweat slowly trickled down his neck as he waited for the reveal. His voice was barely audible. He held his breath, anticipating what his skills would be. The stone tablet glowed, his information flickered on it. The initial skills materialized: appraisal and world tame. He read the second aloud, a note of embarrassment in his voice. Look at how the instructor's face fell. She sighed long and wearily, and her face showed complete, absolute disappointment. She began explaining his abilities. Appraisal is a useful skill for checking the stats of monsters and other researchers, but regarding world tame, she admitted she didn't really know how it worked, and fear slowly crept up on Yamamoto. Irritation hung in the air. She stated that among all the starting skills, the ability to tame was one of the absolutely worst, in the very bottom 3. The instructor explained in detail why this skill was so weak. It uses spirit points SB to command monsters, but she frankly said it was a terrible ability. She relentlessly continued with a ruthless assessment, listing the critical flaws of this skill. Weak monsters were too stupid to follow complex orders. Stronger ones either rejected taming attempts or drained an incredible amount of SB or were simply immune. Even in rare cases when it worked, control lasted only briefly, and Yamamoto froze in stunned silence, the weight of failure pressing on him. He stood frozen as the instructor waved off the curtain, as if brushing it aside. "Enjoy the life of a researcher," and turned away. Her words echoed down the empty corridor, offering no comfort. Entering the main hall, he immediately found himself among an energetic crowd of much younger researchers, clutching a small starter kit and a pamphlet titled "On How Researchers Feel Completely Out of Place," and admitted to himself he was tired and deep inside was waiting for exactly such an unpleasant outcome. He invented logical explanations for himself, whispering that he supposedly never intended to make a serious career out of this, just an impulsive decision and nothing more. But the excuse sounded hollow. He knew he had no real talent to rely on, and this made him feel like an outsider among the ambitious crowd. His depressed appearance did not go unnoticed. From among the group of young men nearby came a voice dripping with contempt. Supposedly, he was just a written-off 38-year-old. The insult tore him from his thoughts. When he raised his eyes, the young researchers looked back, but their attention was suddenly drawn by a heavy step. A boy in glasses pointed behind them and excitedly announced that the Absolute Knights had arrived. The formidable squad majestically passed through the hall. Ahead walked a knight in shining armor. On the sides, a woman with a small dragon on her shoulder and a young mage in a pointed hat. The crowd around began whispering with admiration. "They are the top," someone whispered. "Incredible." Someone else said they heard that next they were going to the dungeons of Shinjuku. And Yamamoto, who stood at the tail of the crowd, could only watch as a huge chasm opened between their world and his own. He considered the skill of evaluation a true power that revealed statistics of both monsters and other researchers. Remembering this, he decided to use it to find out which people were truly the strongest. His gaze fell on the tamer from the Absolute Knights, and a screen with data appeared before his eyes. As her stats began to appear, she seemed to sense she was being watched and slightly turned her head. The information was stunning. Her name was Kokono Sakurako, a 24-year-old person of level 139. Her health and skill points reserves were huge, and the list of abilities was simply impressive: mastery of the heavy sword at maximum, high level of emergency evasion, detection, and even the ability of spatial jump. He just stared, unbelieving, and a nervous laugh escaped him. Her strength was astonishing, skills and special abilities grown from raw talent and harsh training, and the realization that she was more than 10 years younger than him only intensified his feeling of inadequacy. Feeling that he was completely out of his depth, he turned around and left, but decided to kill at least one monster near the entrance first, at least for the memory, before finally giving up. As he was leaving, Kokono Sakurako sharply turned her head. Her gaze became sharp and alert. She definitely felt his assessment. Her leader, noticing that she suddenly changed, asked what happened. She glanced toward where Yamamoto was but waved it off and replied that it was nothing. She froze for a moment. Uncertainty flashed across her face. Something was wrong, but perhaps she decided it was just her imagination. Having reconsidered throwing in the towel, Yamamoto Hiroshige stands in front of the entrance to Nippuri Dungeon in a simple chest armor over a business suit, takes a deep breath, and gathers his resolve. "All right, let's do this," he mutters to himself. He recalls advice from the guild. The smiling receptionist advised newcomers to the Nippuri Dungeon, saying that monsters there are weaker and deaths happen relatively rarely. The word "relatively" planted a small seed of doubt in him. Entering inside, he finds himself not in a building, but in a roughly hewn cave. The instructions were simple: explore the place and return to report to the guild, and the whole process strangely resembled a job interview at an office. But as he goes deeper, the familiar cave walls suddenly give way to something completely unexpected. He froze in place, eyes wide open in disbelief. He stood frozen, looking down a long, dark, and eerily familiar office corridor. The sight was so out of place here that it immediately reminded him of those countless sleepless nights at his old job. In the middle of the noisy office, the section chief slammed his hands on the table and angrily demanded to know why the reports were not ready. Yamamoto shyly explained that he thought the chief would handle them himself, but the manager waved off the excuse, sharply stated it was Yamamoto's fault, ordered everything to be finished by morning, and Yamamoto was forced to apologize and take the blame. At his desk, he sat as the weight of the conflict slowly descended on him, while behind him two female colleagues whispered, "Poor Yamamoto again. He is torn between two realities. One part still in the office forcing himself not to think about work, and the other becoming an explorer and deciding why not enjoy this new adventure. The new reality is a harsh, rocky cave. Now, wearing a white apron over his suit, he stands quietly pondering his situation. No special talent, but plenty of time and a little savings left. He stands among the stones when suddenly a thin, high-pitched squeak sounds through the air, and startled, he sharply turns his head, searching for the source of the sound. His gaze falls on a small, semi-transparent spherical creature sitting on the cave floor. It lets out a quiet cry again. This is a monster, exactly the way a slime is supposed to look. The creature wobbled slightly and made another bubbling sound, and he looked at it in surprise. The surprise instantly turns into sharp focus. He decides to analyze the creature before him, gathers his attention, and utters one command: assessment. I activated the skill and the creature's status appeared on the screen. Ordinary slime, level 1, with full health of 19 HP and stamina of 2 SP. Its skills are tackle and absorb. He digested the information, and a small window with text hovered in his field of vision, so this is how data about monsters appeared in this world. Before he could react, the slime lunged forward and struck directly into his chest with unexpected force. The blows threw him onto the rocky ground. He lay stunned and in pain. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He wondered if the creature had really attacked him and instinctively called up his status. His own information materialized. He is Yamamoto Hiroshige, a 38-year-old man. His health dropped to 54 out of 62. A quick calculation showed he took 8 damage, meaning he could withstand about 6 more such hits, and the very thought that he might survive such an attack stunned him. His brief moment for analysis was cut short when the slime began to tremble and prepare for another attack. Panic overwhelmed him. In panic, he feverishly thought whether to dodge or counterattack, even doubting if he was capable of either. The situation was bad. His eyes instantly returned to the status window, his gaze fixed on the listed skills world taming and assessment, and suddenly a thought struck him. He knew what he had to do and believed that it was now or never. He sharply thrust his hand forward right into the slimy mass lunging at him, convinced that his plan had to work. He sharply extends his hand forward, wild energy crackling around it, and he roars one commanding word, submit. The world fades into darkness and his consciousness trembles. When his senses return, he sees that the slime stands completely still at his feet. The previous aggression has vanished. It squeaks quietly and now waits for his command. He pushes himself back, breathes heavily, and a wave of relief washes over him. The ability to tame the world really worked, and the creature is indeed waiting for his order. He is overwhelmed, suddenly sharply drained of energy. He realizes that the skill had its price and a quick status check shows everything. HP almost full, but SB has dropped to only 14 out of 54. He grits his teeth, wipes his mouth, and tries to pull himself together. The fatigue is fierce, but he compares it to the third night without sleep in the office. He has character, he will manage. His attention falls again on the obedient slime. He remembered that weak monsters rarely obey commands, but this one waits for orders, so he decides to test it. He starts commanding it to jump. To his surprise, the slime immediately obeys, jumps high up and softly plops back down. And watching this, a slight smile appears on his face. It really obeys, he thinks. What different skills there are, and maybe this is not so bad after all. He looked at his newly tamed slime and decided that this first test was enough for now. A thought flashed in his mind, a barely noticeable glimmer of the possibility of what this could mean for him. Later, in a rocky cave, he tests his new companion, putting a protective chest plate over its suit and arming it with a knife. Encountering another slime, he sharply commands the creature to attack the enemy. In response, it fires a liquid projectile that hits the target. But instead of destroying it, the enemy slime breaks into several smaller copies that instantly rush at him, forcing him to dodge and raise the knife in defense. With a triumphant cry, he announces his victory in one lightning-fast clash. He defeated all 5 smaller creatures. He tightly grips the knife. A new wave of confidence rises in his chest, and he realizes that if this continues, he will truly be able to stand up for himself in a fight. His slime chirps joyfully. He laughs and asks if it supports him. And suddenly a status window appears with updated information. He has reached level 8 and happily notices that it is also leveled up. The pleasure fades, leaving a quiet sigh of relief and fatigue. The moment of victory has passed, replaced by the gray routine of the office. He sits at the desk late at night, buried under piles of papers and looming deadlines, and the burden of boring duties falls on his shoulders again. His thoughts return again to the endless hours at the desk. The monotonous glow of computer screens sharply contrasts with the rocky terrain where his new companion waits and quietly cries. He squats down, a slight smile playing on his lips, extends his hand, and gently strokes the gelatinous head of the creature. The slime trembles in response. He looks at the creature, realization slowly dawns on him. It seems he has gained his first subordinate from. With a new sense of purpose, he directs his gaze forward and decides to go a little further into the unknown. The search leads him to the ruins of a large modern building. Its walls are already covered with dense, creeping vegetation under a clear sky. He shields his eyes with his hand from the dazzling sun and peers at the scale of the ruined structure before him. His survey is abruptly interrupted by an anxious voice calling his name. A young woman in a business suit runs toward him, heavily out of breath from the effort. She finally caught up with him, barely restraining her irritation, and sternly reminded him that he was supposed to report immediately after finishing. He apologizes and explains that he got distracted by fighting monsters and was already returning. He stammers, says yes, but quickly explains that he was only scouting a colleague. With wide-open eyes insists. Could it be that he was fighting monsters all this time? She suddenly exclaims that more than 15 hours have passed since he first stepped into the dungeon, and this news completely caught him off guard. Looking up at the sky, he realized that he had not noticed the passage of time at all, and it reminded him of those night shifts at his former job. His colleague does not believe that he fought monsters for so long, but he admits it was much more pleasant than his old job. He describes in detail his former life as an endless cycle of lonely work. Here, at least when he levels up, he feels like he is moving forward. Her attention instantly focuses on his last remark. Wait, she asks, you leveled up? He confirms, yes, just a little. She presses, demanding exact numbers. By how much exactly did his level increase? He decides to check and opens his status window. The display pops up and shows his data, name Yamamoto, age 38, level 8. Now he has skills world taming, evaluation, mental resistance, knife level 2, and emergency evasion level 2. He announces his new level, and with a slight smile thinks that this slow but steady progress is probably exactly that elderly pace. His colleague looks at the confirmation of his new status with absolute disbelief. Level 8, she asks aloud, her voice trembling with shock, in one day. She is amazed and explains that even the fastest students usually need at least a week to advance by just one level. He listens with a neutral face while she processes the information to herself. She acknowledges that he fought monsters for over 15 hours straight, but even so concludes, his growth rate is quite abnormal. He begins to ask about the report, but she interrupts him and reassures him. There is nothing to worry about, she has already confirmed everything, and then she says that he can go home. He slightly bowed his head in acknowledgement. All right then, he said, thanking her for the help throughout the day. When he turns and walks away, she looks at his receding silhouette, a deep question ripening in her mind. Yamamoto Hiroshige, who are you really? Soon he is sitting alone in a rocking train car, tightly holding a small bundle wrapped in a piece of cloth against his knees. He looked into the distance, running through the day's events in his mind. Overall, it seemed quite cheerful to him, and then his thoughts switched to the future, what to do tomorrow. He sat on the train and tightly squeezed the bundle on his knees, with only one thought in his head: tomorrow. The car was overcrowded. A sea of tired faces and exhausted bodies pressed from all sides, a familiar scene from the life he was leaving behind. His days turned into a gray, monotonous cycle. The crush on the way to work, and then long hours in front of screens in a sterile office. He returned home and immediately collapsed from exhaustion amid the chaos of life that was on autopilot. But looking at the city, he felt something important. It seemed to him that years had passed since the last time he truly looked forward to tomorrow. He wondered what tomorrow would bring him, and instead of the old fear, he was filled with a trembling anticipation. A new determination was forged in him, a tangible impulse seized him as he clenched his hands. His adventure was just beginning, and as the train rushed into the very heart of the city, he couldn't wait to find out what awaited ahead. In the harsh black company, another exhausting day began. The boss leaned over Yamamoto Hiroshige's desk and sternly reminded him, don't even think about going home until the work is finished. For Yamamoto, such an oppressive routine had long been a usual affair. Having given orders, she turned and left, leaving him to stew in the tense silence of the office. He sat at the computer, his face a mixture of fatigue and resignation. The silence, like calm on a reef, was broken by the shout of the department head from the other end of the room. He demanded grimly to know where the papers he had asked for were. And Yamamoto, beginning to sweat from the tension, timidly offered to help. Verbal insults made him lonely and humiliated, like a solitary figure standing amid the pressure and demands of work. It was only a memory. Yamamoto suddenly woke up in bed, frightened. He lay for a minute, sighed heavily, and realized he was still having nightmares about that terrible place. Throwing off bad memories and reminding himself that he was no longer a corporate drone, he grabbed the curtains and decided it was time to switch gears and sit at a new desk. Standing by the window, he looked at the city with new determination. It was time to get to work. However, the new grind was on the upper floors of the Shinjuku dungeon, where terrifying, toothy creatures leaped from the shadows. In the Shinjuku dungeon, Yamamoto Hiroshige faced his new reality. Hideous creatures resembling goblins rushed at him. One jumped forward with outstretched claws, another raised a crude dagger to strike. His hand rushed to the sword hilt, and the blade burst from the sheath with a sharp metallic clang. He met their attack head-on. Everything seemed to blur as he spun into a defensive arc, fending off attacks from 3 monsters at once. One of the creatures broke through his defense and leapt into the air to attack him. He reacted instantly, sharply turned around, and met the aerial attack with a clean upward strike that pierced the monster's open maw. After the goblins fell, he looked at his companions with a satisfied smile and named the 3 small slimes Sir Akiro, Sir Gyro, and Sir Saburo. Looking ahead with his slimes behind him, he felt a surge of confidence and decided to move a little further. But the next day his actions caused a piercing scream from the guild receptionist. She shouted his name sharply and demanded to know what exactly he was doing. He stood in the middle of the guild hall, again in a business suit, holding one of the noticeably grown slimes in his hands. An invisible official's voice thundered through the hall, accusingly asking why he had taken monsters out of the dungeon. He tries to calm the situation, but the guild secretary is already in a panic, calling him a walking disaster, throwing in his face that he hadn't slept all night and now this incident, and says she will report it, while he begs her to wait, no less confused by all this commotion. While the scene unfolds at the counter, she has a turmoil in her head. Is it even possible to cancel a tamed skill? He desperately tries to explain, sweat running down his forehead. He swears that the slimy creature must have crawled into his bag when he was leaving the dungeon yesterday, and he didn't notice it. He admits he doesn't know how to cancel the taming, and says the situation looks extremely bad. She listens to his panicked explanation and agrees that it's bad. But suddenly her face becomes thoughtful. She feels that something is wrong, and he also seems to realize that there is something strange about these circumstances. His mind instantly runs through the guild protocols. Usually using skills outside the designated dungeon zones immediately raises an alarm, and the guild would have rushed at him instantly, but he realizes that he was not noticed at all. The receptionist also begins to piece this together. She recalls his report. He leveled up 8 times in one day, now he is showing a completely unknown skill. Her gaze lingered on the man and his strange companion, and suspicion in her head merged into one clear thought. Something is definitely wrong here. She mentally weighed the options, imagining the hassle with the papers she would have to drag along to complain about him. She sighed, made a decision, and a bright smile appeared on her face. Instead of anxiety, she said that for now everything was fine, and he just looked, completely embarrassed by her sudden change of mood. She convinces herself. None of his skill signals worked. Actually, just owning monsters is not forbidden, only using skills outside the dungeon is prohibited. If he does not abuse that, she is not afraid. She mumbles to herself that she believes in him and that reporting now is just an unnecessary hassle. She adds a final plea, asks him not to put on a show of his slimes in the guild hall, confessing that he scared her half to death. Frightened Yamamoto quickly agrees. Having settled that, she gives him professional advice. Has he thought about trying the Shinjuku dungeon? The suggestion makes him stop and consider that name. The Shinjuku dungeon is much larger and more formidable than the one in Ipori. Its overgrown, ruined facade speaks for itself. This is the next level, a perfect challenge for beginners who already have some experience. Inside, Yamamoto stands victorious over a pile of fallen goblins. Obviously, he listened to the receptionist's advice. No longer in a business suit, but in comfortable explorer gear. The bodies of the fallen monsters began to melt, their silhouettes scattered into tiny shimmering particles of light, which eventually completely disappeared. He recalls the receptionist saying that monsters here would be only slightly stronger than slimes. And while that is true, the goblins turned out to be a real fight. His status is level 19, and the skills of mental resilience, knife handling, and emergency evasion are all at level 4. For the victory, he received a substantial reward. Using the appraisal skill, he learned that Goblin Fong is worth from 500 to 800 yen. Inspecting the dungeon ruins, it dawned on him he finally became an explorer and was no longer the office worker he used to be. He stood with new determination that strengthened his will. In this new life, he would do only what he himself wanted and refused to do everything he used to do. His gaze fell on the remains of the fallen goblin, a sharp reminder of practical needs. The materials were valued at 500,800. He looked down the worn corridor of the dungeon and resigned himself to the bitter truth of his situation. Although he had made a vow, he still needed money to live, so he decided. His goal was to avoid unwanted tasks as much as possible. While he was thinking about it, a small jelly-like creature suddenly appeared before him and quietly splashed. He recognized them immediately when two more joined: the first Surichiro, another Surichiro, and Surasaburo, his pet slimes. Above them appeared statuses confirming their names, levels, and skills: tackle and absorb. He crouched down, praised them for their excellent coordinated work, and ordered them to continue scouting ahead. The slimes chirped agreeably in response. As he stood up, he thought how useful it was to have a squad, but immediately remembered a big drawback. Unfortunately, only 3 could be kept active, so he could not take them all home or walk around the city with them. The effort of exploration began to exhaust him. Sweat dripped from his face, he bent over to catch his breath, and his 3 faithful slimes watched impatiently. He examined the loot from the dungeon floor. There was quite a lot of it, but all the items were cheap and dirty. Slightly grimacing, he decided he would have to work a bit more. His gaze fell on a dark, unexplored corner of the room, and suddenly a thought flashed. In those games he once played, treasures were always hidden in such inconspicuous places. Feeling a premonition, he decided not to go there himself and instead ordered his slime, Shrai Charo, to go and check. The slime chirped in agreement and crawled into the darkness. He watched it move away, thinking that other seekers had probably already dug through that area, but a small part of him still hoped something might remain just in case. The small creature obediently advanced, squeezing its jelly-like body into a narrow dark passage hidden in the dungeon wall. From the depths of the passage, a hand shot out and fiercely grabbed the unsuspecting slime. The connection suddenly broke. He felt the link with Sushiro completely sever, and with fear shouted his name, his face contorted in shock. In the depths of the hidden passage, the truth was revealed. Another group of researchers was hiding there, but the scene was grim. A hostile young man with blonde hair held a young woman hostage. She had a gag in her mouth, her hands tied behind her back. He turns around, surprised by the sudden appearance of a man in a work vest. The captive's eyes widen in her gaze, hope and fear flash simultaneously. His surprise instantly turned into contempt. He brushed off the newcomer, asked if he was trying to pretend to be a hero, and ordered him not to interfere, saying they were busy. Yamamoto remained silent, a drop of sweat running down his temple. Yamamoto did not utter a word, quietly activated the skill assessment, and the status of that man immediately appeared in his mind. Date Takuma, 22 years old, human, level 27, from the Black Wolf Pack. He had skills in swordsmanship, emergency evasion, and restraint duels. The boy smiles slyly, as if sensing the interference. He accurately guesses that Yamamoto has the assessment skill. He put the final touch, pressed down with his foot and crushed the caught slippery creature against the stone floor, making sure it belonged to Yamamoto, and wondered why use such a pathetic creature. He continues to mock, saying that those who drag useless slimes along are also trash. Looking at Yamamoto's expression, he believes he stands above him, and Yamamoto inwardly gloomily agrees Date is strong. The verbal attack intensifies as Date points at him with a finger and mockingly lists what he thinks are his complete failures. Skills trash, monsters trash, level trash. He smiles and adds that he almost feels sorry for this pathetic old man. His mockery escalates into a cruel proposal. He urges Yamamoto to join them for a one-time, unique thrill, and even offers to let him touch the tied woman. He and his accomplices burst into laughter while the woman breaks free, her eyes wide open in horror. Yamamoto Hiroshide's face tightened into a grim mask. As a painful memory surfaced, he recalled hearing the news of the woman's death. The memory took him back to the old office where he sat alone. Tormented by unanswered questions, he wondered if the head of the department caused it, or maybe she had committed suicide. A wave of pity overwhelmed him. If only someone had been there to support her. He knew it was too late for such thoughts, but the feeling still did not leave him. His hands, tightly clenched on the table, revealed an inner storm and complete helplessness. But the past defeat now reflects in the current danger. Before him is another young woman, bound and helpless. Beside her lies one of his slimes, defeated. He lowers his gaze, and the same oppressive burden of history that repeats itself settles on him. But when he clenches his fist, despair is cut by new determination. He is no longer who he was before, and in this new life he will live by his own rules and refuse to do what he does not want. He sharply raised his head, his voice firm with conviction, says that this time it will be different. This time he will save her. His gaze fills with fire. In his thoughts a silent, unbreakable promise forms. He will achieve his goal no matter what. He stands firm when Date Takumaskov decided to save the captive. The blonde man completely rejected this idea, declaring that he would simply kill Yamamoto and feed his remains to the dungeon monsters. In response, Date Takuma raises his large axe and, roaring one word die, charges into attack while Yamamoto remains motionless, his face revealing nothing, watching the assault begin. Heavy weapon whistles in the air, descending straight onto Yamamoto's head, and he does not even flinch or try to dodge. At the last moment his hand shot up, crackling with a strange ethereal energy gathered around the palm, and his gaze was sharp and focused. He pushed forward with his palm with one decisive word, tame, releasing a wave of energy that burst from his hand and enveloped the opponent. The other two kidnappers and the bound woman saw the sudden turn of events. Her eyes, visible above the gag, widened in surprise. A powerful ability stops Date Takumu in his tracks, his axe frozen mid-swing. Yamamoto's hand gently rests on the blonde's forehead, and the sparkling energy completely subdues him. When the enemy was completely neutralized, he strictly ordered, "Go and never appear before this woman again and never hurt anyone again." He did not retreat, his order hung in the air. Nearby, one of the small slime creatures shuddered, and a muffled laugh escaped from one of the captors. The laughter of two men exploded. The burly one mockingly pointed at Yamamoto and called him a fool, laughing at the very thought that this taming skill could work on people. His companion roared at Date Takuma, as if asking whether the old man even realized his power, and pressed Takuma to reject the order and smash Yamamoto's skull. In response to the order to attack, a heavy axe slipped from Date's hands into Kuma's grip, loudly banging on the stone floor. He froze, his hands still outstretched. His companions looked puzzled. One of them asked what happened, and at that moment Takuma began to utter a single interrupted word. He finished the thought, his voice was monotone and detached. "I am going home." The others just froze, a question mark hovered over their heads as they tried to comprehend his words. His eyes were wide open and empty. That former aggression was gone. Some strange obsessive force gripped him, as if an internal process confirmed the execution of the order. He repeated his intention with eerie certainty. "I am going home with." Without saying a word, he turned away from the conflict and walked away. The confused companions shouted and demanded to know what he was doing, but he ignored them, and his steps were steady as he moved away. Everything happened suddenly. His mechanical withdrawal throws the companions into panic. They shout confusedly, turn around and flee deeper into the cave, leaving their captive behind, while the young woman they held in captivity watches them go, still trembling from the deal with. When the immediate threat disappeared, Yamamoto knelt before her and uncorked a small vial, reassured her that she was now safe, and insisted that she drink the contents. She obeyed and took the potion from his hands. He leaned back with relief, sighed, placed his hand on his chest, and mentally realized that he had acted only on instinct, and never truly believed that his taming skill could affect another person. The burden of this realization falls upon him. He clenches his fist and increasingly clearly understands that the power he possesses is not an ordinary taming skill at all. Composing herself, the young woman politely kneels and sincerely thanks for the rescue. The evaluation reveals her data. Asus Akimakoto, 18 years old, level 16 researcher from the Black Wolf Pack. Yamamoto exhaled with relief, glad to see her all right. He asked if she was injured anywhere, and she confirmed that she was not. Her gaze becomes serious. She insists that she will definitely find a way to repay him for the potion. and he, a little surprised by her restraint, quickly waved it off and said not to worry. Then he picks up one of his little slimes and carefully holds it in his hands. He simply says that his motivation is straightforward. He intervened only because he wanted to help. He looked at the young woman he had just saved, a Sasaki Makoto. She looked at him resolutely and sincerely. Asizaki insisted that she wanted to somehow thank him for the help. He immediately brushed off this idea and assured that there was no need for it. He stubbornly refused, insisting that the potion had to be expensive. When he began to turn away, he waved his hand and told her that it was enough for him just to know she was safe. Embarrassed, she stammered, trying not to let him leave. Finding courage within herself, she begged him to wait, and then, looking him straight in the eyes, made an unexpected request. Would he agree to form a team with her? The man was filled with complete astonishment. His expression changed to distrust when her words reached him, and he uttered only one confused sound. Suddenly, a completely unexpected proposal arose before him. Yamamoto Hiroshichi and the young woman he saved were walking through a narrow stone canyon. She sincerely looked up at him and asked if he would join her team. He holds back a drop of sweat on his temple and, pondering her question, lets out a stunned sound of confusion. Soon, two sat on a pile of debris near the shabby entrance to the Shinjuku dungeon. Breaking the silence, she solemnly introduces herself as Sasaki Makoto, and once again sincerely thanks them for saving her life. He hesitates for a moment, then says his name, Yamamoto Hiroshichi. She responds with a deep, formal bow as a sign of respect. She recalls the men who captured her and asks if they were her squadmates. Her hands clenched on her knees, and she quietly admitted that she had no idea they were still complete novices at hunting. She remembers the treacherous words of the blonde man. He said it was a common thing travelers lure unsuspecting novices into a squad, then rob them when they are deep in the dungeon, far from guild protection. She finishes her grim story, saying that as soon as the novice hunters get what they want, they kill their victims because deaths in dungeons are not investigated, and Yamamoto Hiroshichi listens, his face gloomy. She stammered, finally realizing the full depth of the danger that awaited her. She admits she feels like a fool she fell for a treacherous offer promising $1 million in a day without any experience. His gaze wanders over the broken dungeon floor as he tries to make sense of it. Then he asks why, after everything she just went through, she would ask him to join her squad. He emphasizes that, as far as she knows, he might turn out to be as bad as they are. At this hint, her eyes widen. She asks if he is really a bad person, and he instantly raises his hands in defense, assuring that he did not mean that at all. It was just a hypothetical what if. She sighs with relief, glad it was only a hypothetical question. He looks away, a drop of sweat on his forehead, thinking she is too trusting. He decided to be honest and admitted that he has been an explorer for less than a week and barely understands how parties work here. Could she explain it to him? She gladly agrees. When you gather a team, moving things will become much easier, and most importantly, you will be able to share the experience earned in the dungeons. This new information instantly captures all his attention. The ideas of experience points and the possibility of sharing them echo in his mind, revealing the core mechanic of what it means to be an explorer, something he had never suspected before. He listens carefully as she explains with an example. If a monster gives 100 experience points, everyone will get their share, and most importantly, they will also receive a bonus depending on how much their teammates earned. She explains that essentially, even if he barely fought, experience would still come in while others were killing monsters. The idea of becoming stronger without doing anything seems very convenient to him. The pleasant haze fades, returning them to the gloomy reality of the dungeon, and her voice becomes tense as she admits. Right now, she terribly lacks money. She lays out her proposal. If they form a team, she will hunt monsters in the dungeon daily, and he, in return, can take the bonus experience as her thanks. She admits that this is what she has been thinking about all along. He processes her words, thoughtfully stroking his chin, and realizes, although her proposal sounds selfish, it is all she can offer. Sensing his hesitation, she presses even harder, insisting that otherwise it would be wrong. She feels she must repay him for what he has done for her, and even if he refuses, the debt will still remain. After a minute of thought, he quietly sighs and finally says, I agree, but on one condition. Makoto's eyes widen, a drop of sweat slowly trickles down her temple as she waits. He clearly states the conditions. We will go to the dungeon together, hunt monsters as a pair, and split any loot found in half if that suits you, he said. Then we have a deal. She looks away, a drop of sweat glistens on her cheek, and hesitantly agrees to his terms. If that suits you, Yamamoto-san. He accepted her answer and added that she should immediately say if anything makes her feel uncomfortable. She, with renewed enthusiasm, promises to do whatever is necessary. He mentally senses that her intentions are good, but her insistence is a bit overwhelming. Somewhere deep in the dungeon, two other researchers froze in horror. One in a steel helmet looked, not believing his eyes, recognized the creature before them as a monster that should only be on the upper floors. The monster is a giant one-eyed creature, its muscular body filling the cave. The cloaked researcher shouts, demanding to know why a monster of such size ended up at such a low level. Turning together as a new pair, Yamamoto notices the tense expression on Makoto's face. She quickly assures that everything is fine, but her wide-open, unfocused eyes and flushed cheeks reveal her unease, so she suddenly suggests ending their research for today. She looks away and mentally tells herself that there is no point in moving forward, better to be cautious than to regret later. He attracts her attention, calls her by name. She turns to him. On her face is a sad expression. She apologizes, feeling that she is becoming a burden again, as if. When Makoto spoke, a deafening rumble echoed in the cave. Yamamoto looked up, shocked. The sound was dangerously close, and a moment later a wounded young researcher fell before them with a dull thud, barely asking for help. From the direction of the noise appeared a colossal one-eyed monster. A cyclops loomed over Yamamoto. Its muscular figure filled the passage, and steam burst from its nostrils. He looked up in amazement at that monstrous figure, supporting the wounded researcher, not understanding what it could be. Makoto confirmed the worst. It was a cyclops, and he himself wondered why it was so close to the surface. It is one and huge. I looked down on them with a sinister intent. Realizing the looming danger, Yamamoto grabbed the fallen researcher and shouted to Makoto that they needed to flee immediately. When he threw the wounded man over his back, Makoto hesitated. She knew she wouldn't be able to escape from the beast if Yamamoto was burdened, and the thought of fleeing, of leaving him and letting him save her again, tore her in half. Her hand gripped the weapon's handle. A stern determination froze on her face as the Cyclops approached. She knew what she had to do. She stepped forward resolutely, thrusting her weapon before her like a barrier, urging Yamamoto to flee from here, and saying she would hold back the monster. Her words stopped him in his tracks. Turning around in horror, Yamamoto could only shout her name, for she stood alone, ready to face that huge beast. Left alone with the beast, Makoto Ashi draws the bowstring, releases an arrow, but the Cyclops disdainfully swats it away. The shaft thuds against his arm and the monster only snorts, not frightened at all. Her ranged attack proved futile, so she quickly grabs a spear and prepares for direct confrontation. She was breathing heavily, realizing her tactic was useless. There would be no decisive strike, so only one hope remained: to somehow slow the monster's movements. Meanwhile, carrying the wounded researcher to a safe place, Yamamoto looks back over his shoulder, his face tense with anxiety, and calls her by name. His gaze catches her frozen before the bulky Cyclops, as if paralyzed by the overwhelming threat. She only stammers, unable to form a complete thought. When the massive hand of the monster lunged at her, one desperate thought pierced through the fear. She needed to pull herself together. The thought returns from a quieter time, the memory of how she knelt in her room, gathering resolve for the trials ahead. She had made this promise to herself earlier, even in ordinary moments, when comforting a crying child in the store. It was her main rule. Her new determination grew from one school memory. Beside a hospital bed, a sick friend apologized to Makoto, lamenting that her illness forced Makoto to leave club activities, and Makoto gently waved it off and asked her to think only about recovery. She put on a brave smile and assured her friend that everything was fine and she would manage. While inside clenching her fists, she had to pull herself together for both of them. Determination led her to the Explorer recruitment board. While other candidates fussed around, she intently stared at the registration sheet, and the path forward suddenly became clear. But the memory was not without pain. A flash of a moment when she grabbed her head from stress, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. The memory shattered into pieces, and she found herself again in the gloomy present. The massive hand of the Cyclops pressed on Yamamoto Hiroshichi. The earth groaned under its weight. When he struggled, the crack of his sword echoed in the cave. The grip slipped off the creature's slippery skin. Colossal strength pushed him to his knees. His hands trembled as he fought against the crushing weight. The monster let out a triumphant roar. It seemed it was already on the verge of victory. At that desperate moment, Makoto's voice sounded one powerful command. Dang. Her scream was not a spell, but a raw, sincere call for support. With all her strength, she shouted right into Yamamoto's face, her eyes shining with conviction. You can do it. She draws the bow, the string groans from tension. She knocks the arrow and with a sharp cry of confirmation releases it. Her gaze is the embodiment of absolute concentration. She is entirely focused on one decisive shot. The arrow hits the target, piercing deep into the single huge eye of the Cyclops. The creature recoils, a column of steam bursts from the wound, and it howls in pain. As the monster staggered, Yamamoto lifted his head from the ground where he had fallen and called Ashizaki with disbelief. He rises, bowing his head, apologizing, saying it was all his fault, and she just remains silent and looks away. She turns to him with a sincere expression and says that from now on she wants to rely on him and he on her. At first, surprise appears on his face, which softens into a warm smile, and he agrees. Now they are a team. She agrees, and they stand side by side now. A formal partnership is sealed between them. In the weapons shop, where blades are lined up along the walls, the owner addresses Kakono Sakurako, saying that the mighty Absolute Knights are finally descending into the Shinjuku dungeon, and asks how confident she feels. She turns away and dismisses the idea of confidence. For her, it's not about how you approach the matter. She simply says, wherever you go, the strongest survives. She leaves the door, sincerely thanks for the purchased blade, and the shopkeeper indifferently nods. Anytime. Watching him leave, she sighs and takes a drag from her cigarette. The shop owner sadly complains that when one of his best clients disappears for a while, it becomes quiet here. Pressing against the stone wall of his establishment, he sighs inwardly what a hassle this is. The shot pulls away from the quiet storefront and reveals a wide, bustling street, the Researchers Avenue. The alley teems with travelers and shoppers, a dense crowd moving among various kiosks and shop windows. In the noise of the bazaar, two merchants pull customers. A young boy shouts that his potions are the cheapest in the city, while an old trader offers fresh eel, assuring it will keep a person on their feet, and even throws in a bonus fillet. Just a minute from Vino Station and you are on Researchers Avenue, a market under the guild's protection. The streets are packed with shops bursting with necessary weapons, armor, and supplies for survival for those who dare to venture into the dungeon. In the noisy alley, Yamamoto Hiroshige was looking intently at everything around. He recalled that a Sasaki said you could replace broken weapons here, but he did not expect such an incredible scale of this place. His thoughts are interrupted. A voice calls his name twice. A questioning expression appears on his face. The voice belongs to a Saizuki Mikoto. She excitedly pushes the phone towards him and exclaims, "Look," showing that a specific highest-level weapon shop is listed in the side menu. He hesitates. He actually liked the atmosphere of that last place they saw. But a Sasaki waved off his unspoken preference and said that anywhere would do. Her casualness instantly disappears. She declares with passionate determination that they will not agree to anything less. If they buy equipment, it will only be from a reputable seller, and she will personally help him find the perfect option. Determination leads them to a busy weapons shop, where the smiling owner greets them warmly. A Saizuki continues searching with the phone in hand, and Yamamoto follows behind, already tired of it all. This relentless search exhausted him. Bent over and gasping, Yamamoto is completely worn out and sighs. He never expected shopping to feel like another exhausting field operation. He called his companion, his voice trembling from fatigue, standing amid a crowd of explorers, and begged a Sasaki for a little rest. But when he turned around where she had stood just a moment ago, there was only emptiness. She had disappeared. He took out his phone and realized he could not reach her, thought she would definitely answer soon. But now his tired body urgently needed to His gaze slid along the noisy alley, lingering on every bench and display window. Suddenly he noticed a wooden sign on a little-used path with the inscription, "Weapons and Armor," and wondered if that was the way to the shop they were looking for. Following the sign, he found himself near a building with stone walls. On a worn plaque above the door was written, "An agonist shop," and he froze for a moment, surprised that such a place really existed here. Heavy wooden doors creaked as he pushed them open, and inside a woman with her hair tied in a bun looked up, a cigarette between her fingers, and acknowledged his presence with a simple low sound. She warmly greeted, "Welcome," introduced this place as the Agama shop. Inside lay a variety of weapons. She noticed that no new customer had visited here for a long time, and Yamamoto stood in the doorway, carefully examining everything. He stepped over the threshold, and the seller immediately got to work, asking what kind of weapon he was looking for. He faltered, embarrassed by her straightforwardness and presence, and managed to say only the word "double" before his voice failed him. She looked at his shyness with a knowing gaze and asked if she could take a look. Before he could properly react, she reached out and grabbed his hand. To his surprise, when she held his hand and examined it carefully, he could not help but notice her strong, firm beak. She firmly squeezed his hand. Her assessment was instant and sharp. From the worn muscles, she understood that he used standard guild knives, pushing them to the limit, and asked if she guessed right. He could only agree her assessment was almost accurate. Realizing her oversight, she apologized for forgetting to introduce herself. She introduced herself as Anaguma Ayumu, the owner of the forge, and added hopefully that she would like to see him among regular customers. In response, he named himself Yamamoto Hiroshige and honestly admitted that he was a complete novice. Ayumu was surprised by this and joked that he had the aura of an office worker, to which Yamamoto just shrugged. He was often told that. When the introductions were over, her voice echoed in the stone walls of the forge, as if hinting that it was finally time to talk business. She led him down the winding stone stairs, whose walls flickered with torches. He followed her, a drop of sweat on his forehead, quietly reproaching himself. He was just walking behind, never explaining that he was only looking, and at that moment he felt that he was no better than a Sasaki-san. In his mind appeared the image of a muscular, traditional blacksmith, a sharp contrast to the woman ahead. He had never imagined a blacksmith with such an unusual aura and watched her descend, trying to understand what to think about a person who seemed to read him so easily. As if sensing his thoughts, she looked over her shoulder and asked if he was surprised that anyone in her place could even think of wielding a hammer. This question completely threw him off track. She turned forward again and went down the stairs, promising to show him the smithy later, but advised him to try using the appraisal skill on it for now, saying it would at least open his eyes a little. He froze in surprise. She even knew that he possessed the skill of evaluation. He recalled that the researcher's alley was an exception there the guild allowed the use of basic skills, and apparently she knew this well. He clenched his intention and next to her appeared a status window. The details were impressive. Aguma Ayumu level 108, colossal HP and SB, a long list of skills, but one stood out above all, blacksmithing at maximum. A thought echoed in his mind as if from it, does this make my words a bit weightier? She looked at him, a confident smile playing on her lips, and suggested telling more, even cheekily hinting at her size. He, embarrassed, quickly waved his hands and insisted that what he had seen was quite enough. She laughed at Yamamoto's stunned face. It was so cute she couldn't help it. Apologizing for teasing, she announced they had arrived, and at that moment the heavy door creaked open, revealing the place they had come to. Aguma Ayumu widely spreads her arms and shows a large room with stone walls. "This is my workshop," she announces, while Yamamoto Hiroshige stands in the doorway examining numerous tools, weapons, and pieces of armor scattered throughout the space. She enthusiastically explains her craft, detailing that each product is made to order, tailoring all her work to the specific wishes of the client, considering everything from budget to preferred materials. He hesitates and asks if she is really ready to offer such personal help to a complete novice like him and says that they haven't even talked about the budget. She just looks at him, an interesting sparkle in her eyes. Then she clarifies, her shop does not serve just anyone, she sells only to special clients or those who were recommended. This only confuses him even more. She reveals the secret of her establishment. The entire establishment, even the sign, is hidden by what she calls a perception block, so only certain people can notice it. When he listens, understanding slowly blooms on his face. Then he names the only condition to even notice this shop. A person must have a unique ability. Awareness strikes him so only he could see it. She smiles and admits she has a weakness for people with rare traits. His very presence intrigued her, but the decision to order is entirely his. He froze silently for a moment, a drop of sweat trickling down his temple as he felt the weight of her words. Finally, he asks what she proposes. In response, he pulls out a thick stack of money and says that this is what he saved from his old office job. Her eyes widen slightly in surprise, and she says she didn't think he could have such a decent budget. She assumes that he probably doesn't know which materials to ask for, so she decides to take matters into her own hands. Focusing her gaze, she activates her skill appraisal. The skill displays its status. Name Yamamoto Hiroshige, a 38-year-old human, level 19, no affiliation. His health and stamina are at maximum. In the skill list, healing management, appraisal, mental resilience, and high levels in knife techniques and evasion, among others. As she processes this information, her eyes narrow. Now she understands. That distorted text she noticed earlier was not some usual taming ability at all, it was a unique skill. The name of that skill flashed before her inner vision, a phrase of incredible power, dominion over all things. He didn't even suspect what she had discovered within herself. He began asking about her experience as a traveler and how she broke her weapon, then quickly corrected himself and talked about himself, saying that only a month had passed, and his weapon shattered into pieces when he repelled the Cyclops' attack. The words resonated, and at that moment Aguma Ayumu felt a question forming in her mind, accompanied by an exciting feeling. The first question concerned the distorted text she had only glimpsed and the unique skill, dominion over all things. In her 10 years as an experienced scout, she had never come across anything resembling that source. The second question concerned his astonishing progress. In a month he had risen to level 19. Such a leap was unheard of, but she reasoned that if it was connected to a unique ability of such power, it could be true. The mind processed the incredible data from the appraisal. But what surprised Ayumu the most was not the skill itself, but when it had activated. He fixed his gaze on the broken knife. Cyclops were powerful monsters, but even their blows shouldn't break ordinary weapons issued by the guild. With rough use, such blades were supposed to last 6 months or even a year. For it to break on him, he had to swing thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of times. And all this within 1 month before he even met that Cyclops. The realization hit her with full force, her hand clenched into a fist. When Yamamoto returned, a powerful feeling began to rise inside Ayumu and Aguma. Within her burned a deep, sincere curiosity about Yamamoto Hiroshige. A faint smile appeared on her face. She looked at him and whispered that he was truly something special. It was for this very thrill that she lived. Ayumu became a researcher to chase the unknown, and a blacksmith to help others dive into the same mystery, arming them against what she herself could not yet understand. She decided and shouted, startling Yamamoto. "Forget about the payment, this time I pay my personal contribution to see how far he can go." Placing her hand on her chest, she solemnly introduced herself. "I am Ayumu and Aguma, and I will personally make your new weapon." Yamamoto, stunned by this offer, could only awkwardly whisper thank you. She explains that to forge the best weapon for him, she still needs to learn a lot. And Yamamoto Hiroshige looks amazed as she begins listing his height, weight, muscle density, sword swing habits, and even body odor. He stammers, trying to object, and she leans in and says she will examine everything about him down to the smallest detail. A drop of sweat runs down his face. Later, as they walked through the bustling market, Yamamoto told Asizaki Mikoto about that adventure, and she froze in surprise, not believing it, asking if he really got a weapon made to order for free. She anxiously asks if he is okay, points out that his mouth is hanging open like a zombie. He can only stammer that a lot has happened. Her shock quickly turns to admiration, and she exclaims what wonderful news it is for him, saying he will get it in time for their next expedition. He agrees and adds that he really wants to see the final result, recalling that Eniguma promised it would be finished in 3 days. Standing in front of the stone building with the sign Najima Workshop, he feels such a strong anticipation that it seems tangible, and thinks to himself that he is excited too. Meanwhile, in the workshop, Anagumo Ayumu is already working diligently, leaning over the workbench, and quietly, confidently laughed. She smiles, surrounded by books and drawings, sketching a new design and thoughtfully thinks, no doubt it will be much more interesting ahead. In the Shinjuku dungeon, a new figure tries to piece together recent events, and tells how some random middle-aged man appeared and somehow tamed his younger one. His foot presses on the head of the younger Date Takumi, pinned to the cold stone floor. Date raises a puzzled look, not understanding how it happened, because he was convinced that taming does not work on people, and still laments that he is a pacifist and incapable of killing anyone. He does not release Date's head, pressing it down while two subordinates kneeling nearby sweat nervously. One of them timidly says that usually taming really does not work on people, and the boss just grunts, pondering these anomalies. His attention shifts to something else. He asks about their plan to release the Cyclops into the upper layers of the dungeon so that it would start killing rookie scouts, and then they could easily take valuable items from the corpses. The two men on their knees exchanged anxious glances. One reported that the Cyclops is already dead, and the other added the most important thing: it was felled by a middle-aged traveler. The leader's composure cracked. His eyes widened in disbelief, and noticing the shock, the subordinates froze, then, overcome with fear, began stammering, whispering his name Krogasimpus. The stone he sits on cracks and crumbles from the strength of his grip. In a moment, a cunning smile spreads across Kuroga's face. He decides that it is time to approach and meet this mysterious elder. 3 days later, in the Anaguma workshop, Anaguma Ayumu, with a satisfied smile, reviews documents, turns to the client and says that the test results are excellent, smiles and adds that he is truly an interesting person. She hands him a formidable dark two-handed sword, and watching how he handles it, says that judging by his movements, the weapon suits him. Do you agree? But he tenses under the huge presence of the weapon. Sweat trickles down his forehead. Dark, vapor-like energy begins to rise from the blade, and he tries with all his might to hold his grip. His face twisted in horror. He screams, denying and insisting that this weapon is completely unsuitable. It is too dangerous to handle. In the dungeon of Shinjuku, Yamamoto Hiroshige and Asizaki Mikoto stand before two giant one-eyed cyclops, and on the stone floor lies a severed hand of a creature, a grim testimony that the battle is already underway. Asizaki tightly grips her staff. Ready in a moment, a projectile hits directly in the eye of one of the monsters, and the beast recoils in pain. Taking advantage of the moment, she shouts a command. Now the wounded Cyclops stumbles forward, its broad, muscular back completely exposed. Suppressing a scream, Yamamoto lunged forward, and with both hands powerfully plunged the massive, decorated sword deep into the monster's spine. The beast collapses. The second Cyclops watches. Asizaki turns to her companion and, smiling, says that he has really learned to use the new weapon. He lets out a tired laugh, leaning the heavy blade on his shoulder, and admits that he still feels more like the weapon controls him rather than he controls it. The status shows level 19, among the skills dominance, fighting spirit, and intuition. The fight is over. Yamamoto looked at his partner and suggested finishing for today. Among the towering pillars of the dungeon, Asizaki readily agreed. The work for today is done. The frame gradually pulls away from the dark dungeon to a bright, modern facade of a building with glass panels under a clear sky. In the research guild, Yamamoto Hiroshige and Asus Akimikoto displayed their loot from monster materials, and a friendly receptionist with a smile informed them that dozens of items together amount to an impressive 140,500 yen, and that she would prepare a detailed list for them. Something catches Aki by surprise. Who knows how quickly this accumulates? Yamamoto, smiling, says that the earnings for one day already exceed his old monthly salary. Then he turns to Asizaki and asks her to go home first, and he himself approaches a frightened employee to quickly settle a few minor issues with the papers. She stammers and says, "All right." The receptionist returns with the document, thanks him for waiting, and then cautiously raises another issue, looking at him expectantly. His face hardened when he asked about the arrest of the people who attacked Asizaki, and said that detaining them would be difficult. The whole matter is complicated by the fact that the Black Wolves squad is behind Thisti have already been noted for such crimes more than once, and the dungeons live outside the guild's control, so gathering solid evidence against them is almost impossible. The receptionist only apologizes and says that the guild is on alert, so they cannot help any further. Yamamoto listens, standing with his back to her, and quietly nods, accepting her words. He turns and walks away from the counter. As he leaves, a grim thought flashes through his mind. The fastest way to get rid of them would be if they simply surrendered. He freezes in place at a familiar voice. Sasaki Makoto calls him, her face shining full of hope. She stands on the sidewalk. Turning back to her, he asks what is on her mind. She fidgets nervously, hands folded in front of her, trying to find the right words. She takes a deep breath and finally dares to ask if he wants to have dinner with her. The confused silence makes her blush. She quickly tries to explain that the brothers are staying overnight at a friend's place, and implies that her invitation is completely innocent. She presents the invitation differently as an evening to bring the team closer together, emphasizing that they have never done anything like this before. Understanding her intention, he agrees that it sounds like a good idea and decides to go. She insists on paying the bill because she invited him, and he simply says, "Let's go." Quite pleased with his acceptance, she beams and gladly agrees. They walk. He flips the situation, says that he is the one who should thank her for the invitation, insists on acting like an adult and paying, encouraging her to eat whatever she wants. She hesitantly accepts his offer. When two walk away along the sidewalk, they do not suspect that they are being watched. From the nearby corner, Date Takuma from Black Wolf Pack observes their departure. Standing with his back turned, he speaks on the phone. At the Yamamoto barbecue restaurant, Hiroshige sits in front of the grill, and behind him against the wall is a heavy battle axe. Piles of empty plates tower nearby, but he just stares ahead expressionlessly, lost in thought. Opposite him, a Sasaki Makoto stopped with a piece in her mouth. Worry visible on her face, notices that he is eating very little and asks if he is okay. He explains that this happens with age. Just watching a young person enjoy food brings pleasure in itself. A Sasaki listens, seemingly agreeing with his reasoning. They keep eating. The table is abundant with dishes, and among them the grill sizzles. Breaking free from a pensive mood, Yamamoto lit up and, reading the menu with enthusiasm, named a large order in turn. Salad, namel, kimchi, short rib, skirt steak, tongue, tenderloin, and liver, while Isazaki looked on with simultaneous shock and admiration as he laughed. Her face softened, and sincere gratitude played an itch. Sincerely thanks him for the food. He easily says not to mention it and to boldly order more, while Isazaki, embarrassed, hurriedly clarifies that she is grateful not only for the barbecue. Her thoughts again lead to the dungeon, to the moment when he saved her from a terrible, beetle-like monster. She understands that it is thanks to his protection during the attack that she is now here and can earn a living as a researcher. She finishes her thought and says that all her success is thanks to him, Yamamoto-san. He turns his gaze and there is no hint on his face. The words seemed to freeze in the air for a moment, and only the sizzling of meat on the grill broke the silence. The tension suddenly melted away. She, stumbling, apologizes for the awkwardness, her cheeks burning with a blush, and quietly asks him to keep watching over her. Yamamoto smiles gently and agrees, assuring her that she can rely on him. Later, under the evening sky, a sigh of deep satisfaction breaks out. Walking along the quiet street under the streetlights, Isazaki turns to him and sincerely thanks him for the dinner. He closes his eyes, a bitter smile on his face, although he is glad she liked it. Inside, he regrets how much lighter his wallet has become, as he clearly underestimated the appetite of the young traveler. His pain was noticeable. Isazaki anxiously asks if he really wants to pay, confessing that she feels sorry. Yamamoto sharply turns to her, sweat running down his face, and loudly insists that he is fine. He instantly tries to pull himself together, giving a strange smile. He explains that adults like to look composed and says that as soon as she stands on her own feet, she will be able to take care of the younger generation, and Isazaki blushes and happily agrees. Her walk with the companion was suddenly interrupted by a figure that stepped out of the shadows and blocked their way. A man in a dark jacket with a fur collar sharply ordered them to stand still. The young researcher tensed, a drop of sweat appeared on his forehead as he looked at the stranger. He cautiously asked who the man was, while Isazaki stood behind, her face full of anxiety. The man just smiled, and a dangerous confidence radiated from his posture. He showed that they were not alone. From the alley behind came several more figures, the same ones who had attacked Isazaki earlier, and their leader, with a mocking smile, declared that he was not going to let them go just like that. When Yamamoto, Hiroshichi, and a Suzuki Mikoto were walking through the night city, their path was suddenly blocked by a large group of sinister men. Yamamoto's face froze. He glanced at them and wondered who these people were. The leader of the group, a man with slick back hair and a jacket with a fur collar, stepped forward with a confident smile and addressed Yamamoto. After that incident with Dato, they decided he owed them, so they were looking for him. Sasaki's eyes widened with shock and recognition. She horrifiedly realizes that these are the same men who attacked her earlier, the Black Wolf Pack. Nearby, Yamamoto questions the very idea that he owes them anything. The leader confirmed her worst fears. He says that Yamamoto not only crippled one of his men, but also interfered in their affairs, recalling the fight in the dungeon where 8 Takuma were injured. Someone demands that Yamamoto go with them for a good long talk, but Yamamoto throws back a look, determination in his eyes, and says he has no intention of agreeing at all. Smur turns into an icy smile and, in response to Yamamoto's challenge, throws a grim threat. If he refuses, he might visit their families. Yamamoto stands firm, but a man named Kurogi shows how thoroughly he is prepared. Calmly says that all household chores are done for today and begins to pronounce Yamamoto's full name Yamamoto Hiroshichi. She drew his attention to the frightened girl nearby, and he confirmed in a grim tone that he also knows her, saying her name aloud to Sasaki Makoto. Her face turned pale, and the weight of their trouble fell upon her. A sharp street light shines. A man in a jacket with a fur collar formally introduces himself with a sly smile. He is Kurogi Kenji, the leader of the Black Wolf gang, and announces that their meeting is a real pleasure. Yamamoto looks grim as Kurogi and his entire gang close in on them, their numbers tightly filling the narrow space. Next to him, a Sasaki grips her weapon tighter, her face full of anxiety as she looks at the threatening crowd. He slightly turned his head and saying her name caught her attention. His face tightened with determination, and he assured her that everything was fine, don't worry about anything. She looks up, her eyes wide open. She is trying to comprehend his resolute promise. It turns out the confrontation takes place deep in a huge underground hall on the third floor of the Shinjuku dungeon. Kurogi snorts mockingly and asks Yamamoto, "Did you really come all the way here just to talk?" Yamamoto steps forward and resolutely declares that he is the one dealing with Kurogi's people, and the girl has nothing to do with it. While he speaks, he parries a sudden knife strike from one of the bandits. The sharp ring of steel echoes through the underground hall. Kurogi met his defensive stance with a predatory smile, not at all afraid of the parry, and asked if Yamamoto really believed he had the right to decide the terms of this clash. Kurogi lunged forward again. A Sasaki shouted at Yamamoto to retreat. He did not listen, focused, and activated his appraise skill against the approaching enemy. His skill revealed the man's identity, Kurogi Kenji, level 46 from the Black Wolf pack, and impressed that the attack was repelled, Kurogi admitted that Yamamoto was no ordinary amateur and offered him a choice. He threw a grim ultimatum with a sly smile. Either they both die there by his hands or they become his slaves. Then he clarified the terms. If they choose slavery, he would spare their lives and even their families. But he added a vile condition: he would keep a Sasaki for his own pleasure. He confessed that at first he only wanted to thank Yamamoto, but seeing a Sasaki's face contort with fear awakened a sadistic pleasure in him. He pressed even harder, taunting. Even if Yamamoto chose to fight and die, first he would still do as he pleased. With the Sasaki silhouettes of the gang emerged behind him, and he demanded a final answer: death or slavery. Faced with this impossible choice, Yamamoto's gaze shifted and slightly turned to a Sasaki. She met his eyes, anxiety was clear on her face, and she gripped her weapon tightly. He ignored the ultimatum, his face hardened, and he reached his hand forward. Kurogi burst out laughing at this audacious gesture, and his blonde subordinate looked distrustfully and muttered, "What the hell?" His gestures were not surrender but activation. A crackling charge burst from the ground and covered Kurogi with his entire gang. "Tame!" shouted Yamamoto, his voice cutting through the chaos. He apologized and said he had enough of the corporate slavery he was forced into. The energy subsided, but the result was not what Kurogi's gang expected. Instead, 4 other researchers stood motionless, with empty eyes, completely obedient and just waiting for orders. Kurogi stared at the newly enchanted researchers, a malicious smile playing on his lips. He recognized the technique, the same one that once caught Date, and though surprised, admitted he did not think it could be applied simultaneously to so many people. Mass taming takes its toll. Drops of sweat gather on Yamamoto's forehead. He clenches his teeth, and tension was readable on his face. His efforts do not go unnoticed. Kurogi's smile widens. He watches, captivated by the whole spectacle. He notices that it seems even Yamamoto himself did not expect exactly this result. He reveals a critical flaw in the strategy, resting the large blade on his shoulder. That simple skill, which he explains with a contemptuous smile, cannot be applied against those who have a higher level than the spellcaster. From this revelation hung a heaviness. A Sasaki with the bow in relaxed hands looked gloomily at Yamamoto and said it was a pity he seriously messed up, and now she declared, each of them will kill him. He stood firm as a Sasaki approached. Her words were a cold promise of death. Kurogi watched with glee and added his own cruel intentions. They would toy with her before killing, and then her family would be given as food to monsters. Yamamoto's hand gripped the sword hilt. In response, he drew the sword. The blade scraped against the scabbard with a sharp clang that caught Kurogi's attention. His initial surprise instantly melted into a knowing smile. When twilight disappeared and shock froze in his wide-open eyes, Yamamoto explained the unexpected nature of his ability. Against opponents stronger than him, its effect is not immediate, only a delay before he begins to act. When a powerful pressure burst from Yamamoto, all of Kurogi's feigned bravery instantly collapsed. He raised his hands in surrender and shouted in panic that he understood, and that Yamamoto had won. He desperately began to bargain, sweat pouring from his forehead. He swore he would never touch any of them again and begged, promising to bring them whatever they desired. His offers became increasingly harsh. He offered to kill anyone Yamamoto named and promised to cover up the traces so that neither the guild nor the police would ever learn about the crime. Anything, he repeated, his voice trembling with panic. Yamamoto's face became a mask of cold shadow as he gave one simple command. Kneel. Instantly, Kurogi fell to the ground, forced to kneel before him. He looked down at the man on his knees and mockingly repeating his desperate offer said, "Anything I want, right?" When Kurogi was completely under his control, Yamamoto gave the first command for now, just stay in place. He gave his first order not with his own hands but through another. The conquered Kurogi raised his head, his eyes widened with horror and sweat ran down his face. At the order, the young researcher stepped forward, pulled his fist back, and loudly admitted that it was the first time in his life he was hitting someone with full force, and Kurogi only managed to let out a scream as the blow flew toward him. The fist hit with a harsh crack, sharply throwing Kurogi's head back, and blood spurted from his mouth. The young adventurer stood over him and said that the gang leader got exactly what he deserved. With a sudden explosive movement, the young researcher knocks one of the gang members to the ground. His fist strikes with fierce force, and the blow throws the man back directly onto his stunned comrades. Assault continues, and Kurogi himself falls to the ground with a crash, wheezing in pain and spitting blood onto the rocky surface, while Asusuki Makoto watches this with wide-open eyes. Kurogi struggles, but a terrible realization overwhelms him. His body does not obey. Panic grips him. He shouts at his followers to run, while the young researcher stands over him as a silent, menacing figure. Helpless on the ground, he desperately calls his team, demands to know what they are doing, and begs them to help. But the gang members just froze and placidly exchanged uncertain glances, silently awaited orders, and had no idea how to react to their leader's sudden defeat. Down Explorer slowly and deliberately takes a step forward. His figure looms. Kurogi's audacity instantly vanishes, replaced by pure terror, and he imploringly asks the approaching one to stop. He stops, looking down at the fallen man, and in a cold tone asks a simple question. When Kurogi and his men attacked them, did they stop when they were told? The question leaves Kurogi speechless. Drops of sweat glisten on his face, his eyes wide open with fear and confusion, and he can barely utter a strangled word. He lies on the ground for a moment longer, until the young researcher, looming over him with a stern expression, orders him to get up, and slowly, defeated, the man rises. In a feverish plea, he begs the traveler to wait and make him his subordinate. Sweat drips from his battered face, and he swears to work for him, kill for him, do everything he desires. His desperate bargaining continues. He offers his people and tells the traveler that he can do whatever he wants with them. He even promises all the money he desires, while the rest of the Black Wolf pack stands in stunned silence. The loot offer intensifies. Kurogi shouts that he can get as many women as the traveler wants, but the cold gaze of the unknown remains fixed on him, completely unimpressed. In response to the vile offer, the young researcher rushed forward, driving his fist deep into Kurogi's stomach. The force of the blow threw the gang leader back, his face becoming a mask of pain and surprise as Kurogi curled up, and the young researcher glanced at Asusuki Makoto, then turned to the fallen man, explaining that he never said he would kill him. Instead, he said that Kurogi would fix everything and warned, "Say no more words in front of Asusuki." The next morning, the news anchor from the studio with a view of the city begins the broadcast and announces that it is time for the main events of the day. On the front page, a police photo of Kurobi Kenji, 25 years old. The report states that he and more than a dozen members of his research group, Black Wolf Pack, were arrested that morning on charges of intentional murder and desecration of bodies. This arrest was talked about in the news. While they ate together, the young researcher and Kimikoto watched a report that detailed the arrest. The police report stated that Kurogi's group behaved suspiciously near the station shortly before they were taken into custody. He explained to her that after he subdued the gang leader, he gave Kurogi 3 clear orders. The first order was a vow never to harm anyone again. The second, an order for Kurogi to gather all his subordinates, to the last one, even those not present, and surrender to the authorities the next morning. The man from Alaska demanded that they all be silent and fervently apologized to the families of their victims until the sun rose. Returning to the conversation, he apologized to Asizaki for cutting everything off so abruptly. She calmed him down. "Everything is fine. I told you yesterday that I never wanted revenge." He listened, then admitted that yesterday's events also horrified him. A picture appeared before his eyes of her being tied up and gagged by the kidnappers, but his thought was cut off. But that fear was softened by a memory. He recalled Yamamoto-san's words, "It's all right, no need to worry." Asuzuki Makoto shines, clasping her hands in front of her with relief, and happily says that the trial turned out not to be so scary because she believed. Opposite her, a young researcher calmly agrees and adds that he is glass. She sighs happily and admits that it seems to her as if he always saves her, and he denies it, saying that she has saved him more than once. Her eyes widened in surprise. She checks if he really means it. He simply replies that he does. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted by a news broadcast on the neighboring screen. Asizaki looks up and hears with surprise that the famous travelers' absolute knights are in Shinjuku. When the broadcast shows the group walking, the young researcher immediately recognizes them. They are the same ones he saw in the guild earlier. The TV host on the screen announces a special edition about the Absolute Knights. They are called the most powerful party, currently conquering the dungeons of Shinjuku. The report suddenly switches to footage of an interview with the squad leader Kenzaki Leon. A female reporter asks why the squad, known as the strongest, decided to descend into this dungeon, and he answers with a confident smile. He begins to answer the interviewer, quietly smiles and simply says, "The truth is, status and fame do not interest him." He continues explaining, "The only reason he enters the dungeon is self-discipline, and fame turned out to be an accidental and rather troublesome consequence." He talks about his trouble size. Even outside the dungeon, people shout after him and ask for autographs, not giving him peace. Despite this, he perceives conquering the Shinjuku dungeon as just another step in his training and decides, if he can be an example for those who look up to him, he will devote himself to it fully. Meanwhile, Asizaki Makoto and the young researcher were watching the broadcast. Asizaki was fascinated, and the young researcher skeptically said that although Kenzaki Leon has an amazing reputation, he seems suspicious to him. He continued to fix his gaze on the screen, thinking that this man is the leader of the strongest party in the country. The glossy image from the interview shatters. In its place comes a grim reality. Deep in the Shinjuku dungeon on the 90th floor, Kenzaki Leon is not himself at all. He was beaten, sweating, and his eyes are wide with horror. His palpable fear envelops everything around, but the status screen screams otherwise. Level 148 and skills in fencing, discipline, and evasion are maxed out. He stood stunned, his gaze fixed on the colossal figure that had just appeared before him. The powerful dark-skinned legs of this creature stood among the rubble of the dungeon corridor. Behind swayed a long tail, and at its end was attached a katana. The size of the creature was simply stunning. In a ruined stone chamber, a group known as the Absolute Knights confronts a horror, the colossal six-armed Ashura ogre. Each of its mighty hands grips a katana, and the horned head with three faces looks down on the adventurers. And the status check shows its stunning power level 166. It possesses skills like six-blade style and magic neutralization. The monster burst into motion. Its six swords crashed in a fierce attack. Leon, the group leader, froze from the sudden assault, and Sakurako instantly reacted, drawing her blade, which sharply sparkled with steel. She parried the blow and shouted back to her leader, "Leon, to the front, we have almost no options left." Their warning goes unheeded. Leon is already on the ground, his armor-dented sword knocked from his hands. He groans, and the party mage Mika with a grim expression turns to Sakurako and insists, "We must retreat immediately, we cannot handle this enemy." Sakurako sharply turns to the fallen leader, her voice sharp with despair. She shouts for him to get up and retreat. He lies on the stone floor, his face battered and bloody, and the word retreat echoes in his thoughts. She tries to lift him but remains on her knees. Seeing this, Sakurako orders Mika to prepare a skill for escape. The sorceress responds grimly. She says it won't work. The idea of retreat drives Leon mad. He challenges the order, fervently reminding that they are absolute knights, the strongest force, and fears that retreat now will bury their reputation. Sakurako's patience snapped. Snorting, she shouted that now is not the time to worry about such trifles, and despite the depressed leader, raised her sword high and rushed alone towards the enemy. She charged forward, her blade clashed with one of the six katanas of the Ashura ogre. The monster effortlessly parried the strike. Its colossal strength stopped her desperate lunge. Shockwaves passed through her arm, chipping steel from the blade. Realizing the futility of a direct attack, she changed tactics, turned to her comrades, and shouted to warrior Adachi to grab their fallen leader. Leon, stunned and wounded, weakly asked what she was doing. Assessing the situation, Adachi lifted the wounded Leon onto his shoulder and, together with Mika, began to retreat, while Sakurako repeated the order in a firm voice, "Thee must withdraw now." Leon struggled from Adachi's grasp and protested against fleeing. She turned her back to the retreating group. Her long ponytail whipped through the air as she faced the monster alone. Fixing her gaze on the enemy, she declared to both the commander and herself, "I will be the rearguard and hold the line." The Ashura ogre stood before Hera, six-armed avatar of destruction, its blades gleaming with sinister energy. In response, she lunged forward, but the monster was faster. All six of its katanas sliced through the air in one devastating motion and converged directly on her. She was a blurred spot in motion, spinning and leaping through a deadly web of steel. She dodged one blade, then another. Her body was a whirlwind of desperate evasion, and her squad could only watch from afar. Their salvation was bought by her sacrifice. She clenches the blade and stands opposite the giant ogre Ashura. As cherry petals begin to swirl around them, she activates her technique, the dance of cherry snow. Her confidence is unwavering. She carefully assesses the towering beast, and despite its colossal strength, believes she can bring it down. She lunged forward, but the ogre effortlessly parried her strike with one of his six arms, the force of the clash sending a wave along her blade, and her eyes widened in disbelief. The monster instantly retaliated with one of his katanas. He made a wide, devastating swing that cut through the air. At the last moment, she dodged to the side. The blade struck the stone floor where she had stood just moments before. Fragments flew from the impact, and she rolled away from the blast wave. Throwing herself back, she catches her breath, her face a mixture of irritation and determination, silently vowing that this debt will one day be repaid. But her fight was over. In the now empty stone corridor, only 2 wisps of smoke remained where she had stood, proof of how quickly it had ended. The next day, rumors began to spread. Reports of the Absolute Knight's complete defeat at the hands of the floor boss Ashura Ogre, who stands alone and unchallenged in the dungeon chamber. At the Research Guild, the smiling receptionist cheerfully exclaimed that the evaluation was ready and apologized for the wait. "We are not researching standing next to a Saizaki Makoto. We politely thank the receptionist for her work." He returns, but his attention is suddenly caught by a whisper spreading through the guild hall, and he shifts his gaze to the entrance. He told his comrades that the guild had been unusually noisy lately. At that moment, a woman in a blood-red kimono stepped into the hall, with a large cage attached to her back, and her strong presence instantly silenced everyone. She approaches the counter with a direct gait and allows the huge damaged container to crash to the floor. Looking at the receptionist, she simply says that she needs an assessment. Her appearance, both formidable and battered, stunned the young researcher. He froze, confused, when she responded to him with a silent, unwavering gaze, and fresh cuts were visible on her face. She casually asks if she is not disturbing, then immediately turns away, saying she has other matters to attend to. She brushed off the anxiety and told the receptionist that she would return that night to complete the paperwork and receive the payment. The receptionist, with worry in her eyes, quietly agreed. She passed through the main hall of the guild, her silhouette gradually fading into the distance. A group of researchers watched, and a young woman, recognizing her, whispered, "That's from the Absolute Knights, isn't it?" Next to the counter, her companion asked the guild receptionist again, who confirmed that it was indeed Kakono Sakurako, and the young Asazaki corrected her friend. Kakono was once a member of the Absolute Knights. Yamamoto, the unexplorer, immediately caught that the past tense was being used. The receptionist explained in more detail that after the incident in the Shinjuku dungeon, Kakono and O apparently left the team. Since then, she has had only one goal: she hunts bosses and unoccupied dungeons herself, relentlessly every day. This solitary expedition has a specific, useful effect. At the reception, they explained that when the floor boss is defeated, the building transformed into a dungeon returns to its original state, and this helps the guild cope with the constant threat. But she added, it is this very efficiency that creates problems. Some researchers who rely on these places for regular farming have started to complain, and as she admitted, this has resulted in a pile of paperwork and terrible hassle. Yamamoto silently stood in the noisy guild, digesting what he had heard and thinking about Kakono Sakurako, the woman who abandoned the strongest party in the world, and he realized, even the strongest have their reasons. His reverie was interrupted when a Sasaki called him by name, and Yamamoto-san asked what he was thinking about. He turned to her, determination suddenly shining in his eyes, and asked if she would go with him. He leads a Saizaki through the bustling market street. She asks if he really intends to help her pick out new weapons, and he gladly confirms that he knows one particular shop he wants to show her. They stand in front of the display window. She asks if his weapon was forged here, and he confirms, recalling that the craftsman also promised to repair the weapons of his comrades. Her expression changes as she considers the consequences of his offer. He looks at her knowingly while they stand near the sign pointing the way to the Enigma Weapons and Armory shop. They walk down a narrow alley, pipes and metal mechanisms stretched along the walls. Their path leads them to the entrance of the Anagamas shop. Here stand heavy wooden doors set into a stone arch. A woman in a kimono with a katana at her side peeked out from inside. Her face thoughtful, she recognized them, the couple from before, and Asazaki and Yamamoto reacted with surprise. They enter the armory. The walls are completely covered with weapons and armor of various kinds. From the center of the room, a woman greets them. The saleswoman leaned on the counter, a cigarette between her fingers, and with a sly smile said in surprise that her two favorites seemed to know each other, and she called the young woman today's customer. She quietly giggled, her eyes sparkling cheerfully. Asazaki, embarrassed by the familiar tone of the shopkeeper, could only respond with a stammered yes. Her gaze fell on the bow in Asazaki's hands. She noticed that Asazaki had probably been using a bow for a long time and added that it suited her very well. Asazaki lowered her eyes, a drop of sweat glistened on her cheek, and her hands tightly gripped the weapon's handle. While Asazaki accepted the compliment, Aguma looked at the other customer in the shop, a woman in a formal kimono, and with a slight apology explained that she could not take her order yet because she had already promised to make an order for someone else. Hearing this conversation, Yamamoto and Asazaki stood and watched, and the young man quietly whispered that he understood everything. It seemed he understood, but suddenly a moment of confusion flashed across his face. On the other side of the room, a woman in a kimono stood silently, her expression inscrutable. Her silence was broken by a sharp metallic ring. A blade was tearing out of its sheath. From the other end of the workshop, she drew a katana from its scabbard. In the next moment, she lunged into the air like a blurred flash. instantly closing the distance, the sword raised high for a devastating strike, indirectly aimed at the two researchers. They could only watch, eyes wide open and frozen in shock, as the blade descended upon them. Sasaki stood ready, tense and prepared for battle, facing the mysterious swordswoman who had just attacked them. She slightly turned her head, her face unreadable as she examined them. The tension broke when the shopkeeper Anaguma Ayumu, leaning over the counter, calmly addressed the attacker Sakura, told her to stop and warned her not to touch her favorites. Seeing this confrontation, Sasaki froze in confusion. The immediate danger seemed to have been removed by the calm, almost indifferent intervention of the shopkeeper. Sakurako turns to them, sheathes her sword, and apologizes, explaining. She did not intend real hostility, she just wanted to test their abilities, and Yamamoto repeats her words, still trying to comprehend the situation. A confident, knowing smile blooms on her face as she watches their embarrassed reactions. At the counter, Ayumu exhales a cloud of smoke, looking completely unimpressed. Later, Satoroko asks Ayumu to hold her weapon. Sasaki's eyes widen in disbelief. Is this really happening? Sakurako confirms it is, but adds that there is a condition. She looks directly at Yamamoto. The playfulness is gone, replaced by focused determination in her eyes, and she asks, "Allow me to join your team." Sasaki froze, not believing their eyes at the unexpected proposal. Their mouths dropped open, and simultaneously a cry of shock burst from both. The next day, near the overgrown entrance to the Shinjuku dungeon, a persistent thought hung in the air. Yet, why did she say that? Inside, Yamamoto Hirashige watches as Kakono Sakurako walks away. Her kimono sharply contrasts with the dungeon's decay, and he recalls her simple words from that night. "Let's meet tomorrow in the Shinjuku dungeon." Then she just left. He turned to Saizuki Mikoto and tried to justify the harshness of their new companion, saying that Kakono probably has the gaze of an experienced fighter, which they have yet to discern. And besides, he added, with her on the team they could gather resources much more efficiently, and Mikoto quietly agrees. However, attention is drawn to the new bow in her hands. She says it also needs to be paid off, and a status window appears above it, naming the weapon Amano Makiko Yumi, a powerful bow with skills like auto-repair and various range adjustments. They stood amid the ruins. Yamamoto asks what it feels like to the touch, and Makoto, a little embarrassed, says she hasn't tried it yet, but it is strangely light and fits perfectly in her palm. The conversation is interrupted by the approach of a figure. A voice apologizes for its weight, and Yamamoto simply replies, "All right." Only a pair of combat boots are visible, firmly stepping along the overgrown path. The figure turns out to be Kakono, but her appearance has radically changed. Instead of a kimono, she is in modern combat attire, jacket, short top, and shorts, with a weapon on her hip. Yamamoto froze, embarrassed, stammered, and whispered her name, and she looked coldly and said that this is her combat outfit. He stands waiting while Yamamoto and Makoto look on, stunned with surprise. Blushing slightly, Yamamoto can only quietly confirm, "I said he." Stammers notices that her armor is too light. Next to him, Makoto anxiously asks if Kakono needs some protection. Kakono coolly replies that it is unnecessary. Her strategy is simple, just don't get hit, and this blunt advice stunned Yamamoto and Makoto, making them freeze in silence. She apologizes for the suddenness of everything, but asks one thing: to call her by her real name, Sakurako. Her companions just look, confused by such an unexpected change of address. She says that formalities are not to her liking, and informs Yamamoto that she will call him Hirashige and the other one Makoto. He was momentarily confused, but quickly stumbled and whispered his agreement. Then Makoto adds his consent, and then, with a slight blush, shyly asks if she can also call him Hirashige-san. She quickly adds that he can call her Makoto in return, and a warm smile blooms on his face. He readily agrees, to Makoto's great joy. Deep in the dungeon, Hirashige and Makoto stand ready for battle, their faces tense among the bare stones. So for them, on the 40th floor of the Shinjuku Lum dungeon, a huge armored reptilian monster, its spiky shell and mace-like tail, filled the cave. At the threat, Horishige decisively thrusts his hand forward and orders his slimes Sura, Ikiro, Jiro, and Saburo to launch an attack. The small creatures leap to the monster's feet, and Makoto draws his bow, preparing for his own attack. When the slime distracted the attention, she released an arrow, and it hit the beast's armor with explosive force. After the creature was felled, Sakurako appears, praising her Ushige for the successful move. He awkwardly thanks her, but her face suddenly becomes serious. Something is bothering her, and she wants to ask him a question. She asked why he does not tame more monsters, reminding him that he called his ability World Tame. And Hirashige, holding one of his slimes, listens carefully to her question. He begins enthusiastically explaining the known advantages of his ability: high control, accuracy, and the ability to share experience, and again emphasizes it works on people, monsters, and even entire higher-level entities. Sakurako notes, it seems his power has only advantages. Hirashige, with a worried look, admits that there is a part he has not yet told her about. The first serious drawback of his skill is that it consumes a huge amount of SB, and if he uses it against someone stronger than himself, the effort completely incapacitates him for a while. and he becomes a living corpse. He adds that there is a delay between activating the skill and the moment when control finally takes effect, and according to him, the stronger the target, the longer and more dangerous this pause becomes. And perhaps most importantly, he says that once the skill world taming is activated, it cannot be cancelled. This commitment is absolute and irreversible. He says that he manages to carry small creatures with him unnoticed, but as soon as he tries to take bigger ones or many big trouble awaits. Here is his experience with the Kuroji gang as an example. Even now, all those on whom he applied the skill are somewhere far away just waiting for his orders. And one more limitation apparently, he does not share experience points with them, and this slows down his own growth. Listening to this, Sakurako shares her opinion. She honestly says that the very idea of forcing people to obey is personally unacceptable to her, even if they are considered villains. He looks at her with a serious expression and sincerely agrees. If he can, he says he does not want to rely on his tamer skills. His words hung in the air of the cave, making Sakurako and Makoto silently ponder the heavy burden of his unique power. She processed the information. All variables were weighed in her mind: the costs of use, the delay of effect. A thoughtful expression appeared on her face as she considered the consequences of her Rushige's powerful but imperfect skill. After a short pause, she turned to her Rushige with a stunning proposal, that he use his skill on her. Her proposal stunned both Hiroshichi and Makoto. He could only exclaim, not believing what he heard. Makoto was the first to find her voice and shouted at Sakurako in fright. "Are you serious? We just learned about all the downsides, especially that this ability cannot be released." He supported Makoto's concerns and directly told Sakurako that she did not fully understand what the ability was, and his words ignited a spark of insight in Makoto's eyes. Sakurako did not back down. She said that the mysterious nature of this ability was a weak point. Even if they did not seek the deepest levels, danger would sooner or later find them, and at that decisive moment it was necessary to know for sure what this ability could do, what it could not do, and at what distance it worked, so she proposed to test it now on herself as a trusted member of the group. Her logic was indisputable, and Hiroshige agreed that it made sense. Seeing his agreement, Sakurako decided that it was not worth doing the test here in the dungeon and suggested going to the surface for a day. As they were about to leave, she smiled once more and reassured him. "Do not worry about the fact that the skills are irreversible, I have an idea." Her bold proposal made Hiroshige hesitate deeply as he looked down at Sakurako and weighed the risks of her plan. He looked at his hand, the source of that power, and admitted to himself. They still understood too little about this ability. A moment of reflection passed, and his face tightened with determination. He decided, when the time comes, he would act. The next day they arrived at the place, a huge training area paved with stone slabs. On the upper tier of the Shinjuku dungeon appeared before them, and Sakurako looked around in surprise, admitting that she had not even suspected the existence of such a place. Aguma explained why they ended up here. On the surface, it was forbidden to use abilities and weapons, so this level of the dungeon was the only place where they could safely conduct their experiments. She took the steering wheel in her hands and confidently declared that it was time to finally agree on the terms of the test. Her Rushige readily agreed. The woman outlined the key factors of the experiment, noting the huge gap in levels 91 between them, and most importantly, revealed that she also possessed the skill of mental resistance, adding another layer to their trial. She began the experiment, identified key variables, and asked Hiroshige about SB consumption by skills and the delay of their activation, and Sakurako confirmed that they were ready to continue with. When the conditions were agreed upon, he gathered his courage. Sweat was dripping down his forehead, and he raised his hand to the rubber to activate the ability. He released the ability with one word: tame. A crackle of energy burst from his palm, and he felt his power sharply melt away. SB dropped almost by half. Sakura asked from the side if it worked. He waited, tensely searching for the slightest sign of change, but the rubber remained completely unmoved. She broke the silence and with a cold and confident voice confirmed that she felt nothing. Calmly considered two options: either the ability had not yet activated or it did not work at all. Rushige grimaced, feeling a huge outflow of energy. Sakura noticed that 30 seconds had already passed, much longer than before, and recalled that on the previous, stronger target, the effect occurred in only 10 seconds. Hearing this, Aguma made a bitter conclusion: the skill is not omnipotent. Its failure could have happened due to one of two reasons: her own mental defense or a huge gap in powers. Her thoughts suddenly switched to a completely different target. Could this power even work on a terrible Asher ogre? Rushige exhaled with relief. What a joy that the ability did not work. Kakono Sakurako agreed and added that if it had succeeded, a person like her would have been forced to obey every command. Hearing this, Aguma Ayumu nodded and confirmed. Sakura understood everything correctly. Her eyes widen as the full meaning dawns on her. This skill forces unquestioning obedience. Rushige quickly calms her down, saying that he knows Sakura would not think he would abuse such power. And Aguma, quietly smiling, intervenes and clarifies that she commands no one. Out of nowhere, she grabbed her Rushige's hand and sharply pulled him toward herself. This sudden movement frightened both him and Sakura. Leaning close, she looks intently at him and begs, "Do not refuse to give me orders." Her voice burns with passion. She fervently says, "Command me as you wish, my lord." Her outburst stunned both Rushage and Sakurako. They froze, their faces full of disbelief. In the stone training courtyard, Hiroshige stands next to Sakurako and Anaguma Ayumu, ready to discuss the results of their recent experiment, and begins to explain the results of the World Tame test. He, with a drop of sweat on his forehead, notes, despite the large difference in their levels and Ayumu's mental resilience, the taming effect still works in about a minute. It is also noted that during that 1-minute delay, commands can still be given to the target, an important detail that Sakurako receives with a worried expression. She contemplates this. Suddenly, Anaguma Ayumu leans so close to her it is clear that his frivolous order of unconditional obedience works, and to his surprise, she respectfully calls him my lord. The curls trembled embarrassedly from her closeness, and how she called him, shouting that she should not say my lord. She questions his refusal, and from afar Sakurako shouts at Ayumu to step back. Apparently, her internal resistance causes the taming effect to manifest unusually. In the noisy alley of adventures, Ayumu explains that she was simply following his order to behave as normally as possible. Clearing her throat, she announces that she is going to use an item that will remove the effect. Hearing the mention of an item to remove effects, her Rushage asked for clarification, and Ayumu calmly explained that it is a thing that removes curses and other abnormal states, adding that since she did not have one, they came to the market to buy it. It was necessary to find out how much such an item costs, and Anaguma Ayumu explained. Although it is more expensive than ordinary potions, the price is quite affordable. She clearly said that regardless of the store, the price would be from 800,000 to 900,000 yen. He recoiled in shock and exclaimed that it was a crazy price. When they were leaving, Kokono Sakurako could not hide her surprise at such a high price. While Ayumu was not worried at all, he simply suggested hunting a little on the 80th floor to earn the needed money. The search led them to a well-equipped shop, but the news was disappointing. The owner bowed deeply, sincerely apologized to Sakurako, and informed that he currently had no dispelling stones. He admitted that he had no news about when a new batch might arrive. Another seller nearby explained that these items are very rare, and a third sadly noted that they had not received any new supply for a long time. Overwhelmed with guilt, I stood humbly before her outburst. Her voice was tense. She apologized sincerely and incessantly, taking full responsibility for what had happened. He hastily raised his hands, trying to calm her, and insisted that it was not her fault. But he himself did not hide his surprise how it happened that all the goods were completely sold out in all the stores. Sakurako loudly picked up the growing concern of the group, asking how much time it would take to remove her taming effect at such a pace. And Ayumu, still upset, agreed and added that she wanted to get rid of this effect as soon as possible. She listened attentively as her Rushage explained with a serious expression that besides waiting for the stores, there was another way to get an item that removes the curse. Hearing this, Ayumu decisively declared that she would get one from the dungeon herself. It was a real challenge. Spell items rarely drop on the 80th floor of the Shinjuku dungeon, and that is why they are so expensive and so hard to find. Ayumu turned to Sakurako and confessed that their group had just formed. She explained that she had to leave for a short time, but would return as soon as she got the item that removes the spell. Before she could finish her impulsive step forward, insisting that he go with her, she addressed him directly, reminding him that this trial was his idea for the squad. As the leader, she felt it was her responsibility, especially since the problem was caused by her own skill. Their argument was instantly interrupted by Sakurako. She suddenly exclaimed that she was leaving. She stood her ground, firmly stating that she was part of this group and would not be left behind. She froze, a drop of sweat appeared on her temple, and firmly with one word she answered no. She refuses Hiroshichu. Ayumu is told directly that she cannot guarantee right now that she can protect both him and Sakurako from the monsters on the 80th floor. She simply cannot handle it alone, so she cannot let him go with them. She falls silent, hesitating. Another option comes to mind, but they are both presented with her condition. If they train together and become strong enough to overcome the 80th floor, only then will the three of them venture into the dungeon as a team. She glanced at her Rushage for confirmation and asked if they agreed. He immediately and enthusiastically agreed. As soon as they agreed, a sense of determination prevailed there. Ayumu finally firmly decides on his new goal, first to level up, then to storm the 80th floor. Their mission is clear, to obtain the item that removes effects. Their path is set, the new group moves forward with high spirits. Hiroshige cheerfully encourages them, ready for the challenge, while Sakurako quietly warns them to be careful. As they leave, an unknown figure in the shadows watches them from a nearby alley. From a high window, Kanzaki Leon looks down frowning, clicks his tongue in irritation, and mutters Sakurako's name, while below she stands with new companions Grushage and another female researcher, as if forming a new group. Meanwhile, in the deepest recesses of the Shinjuku dungeon stands a ready monstrous figure. A six-armed Ashura ogre grips a katana in each hand, his powerful body tense and ready for battle among the ancient stone corridors. The entity is not alone. From the height overlooking the chamber, a young woman with hair covering her eyes quietly, knowingly laughed. She sensed the arrival and whispered to herself that now someone is above. She appears seated on a huge stone throne like a queen of the depths, a confident smirk playing on her lips, and she directly summons the one skilled in dominion to appear before her. What waits in the abyss is finally taking shape. On the training floor of one of the upper levels of the Shinjuku dungeon, two researchers stood opposite each other. Their weapons had just clashed with a sharp crack. They froze, ready for the next move. Hiroshi Yamamoto clenches his massive black sword, sweat dripping down his forehead, while Sakurako Kakono holds a katana with a calm, focused expression. He lunged forward, his foot stomping so hard that the stone tiles beneath him cracked as he prepared to strike. Their sparring continues, and Sakurako's gaze lingers on a third figure at the edge of the training ground, Makoto Asizaki, holding a bow. Hayes does not take his eyes off Makoto, who is already drawing the bow, nocking an arrow, and aiming directly at the swordswoman. The arrow is released and flies through the air, but Sakurako easily ducks under its flight and rushes forward with her blade ready. The training is over and she breaks down his rushage. The attack was delayed by 2 seconds, the stance was not deep enough. He accepts the critique and notices his flaws. His level is 79, hers a formidable 139. Then she turns her attention to Makoto and says that her stance after the shot is weak and leaves her completely open to attacks. And the confused Makoto, level 70, only stammers and agrees. The instructor looks at them with a confident smile, and after several days of training says that both Hiroshige and Makoto have real potential for this work. While Hiroshige, sweaty from uncertainty, quietly doubts to himself whether this is really so. She explains that fighting monsters relies on the coordinated work of the team, so their coordination training was extremely important. Seeing that they have come this far, she sees no problems for them. Hiroshige listens, his face serious. Their training finally ended, and she said that now they could boldly head to the 80th floor of the dungeon, to which Makoto responded decisively and enthusiastically. Yes. They were dazzled by the realization that they could finally try to achieve their true goal. The instructor confirms this with the dispersal object. They will be able to find the air and remove the taming that she herself imposed on Sakurako. Some Rushage nervously laughs and tries to brush it off, saying he's fine, but his indifferent "everything is okay" is met with shocked cries of no from Makoto and their instructor. The next morning, Hiroshige stands alone in the central square of Wanderer's Alley, a lively place where adventurers gather, his face set with stern determination before the upcoming mission. He recalls the last instructions of their coach. To prepare for tomorrow, she will go to the Anaguma store to pick up the sword she ordered, and he and Makoto have to buy all the other necessary things. His sized burden of the task overwhelmed him. The 80th floor, he thinks to himself, will be much harder than anything he has ever had to face. He recalled his past, the time when he was just an ordinary office worker. After being fired with nothing to do, he became an adventurer, because it seemed there was nothing left to lose, so it was worth trying. Suddenly, their thoughts were interrupted by the coach. She announced that Sakurako was a former member of Party Number 1, Absolute Knights, and assured that she was incredibly strong and experienced, and that the 80th floor was not her first time. He sighed heavily. Although Sakura herself decided to join, his thoughts were with Makoto. She was different. She was here only to support the family, and he felt a deep responsibility not to let anything bad happen to her. Walking down the bustling market street, his determination hardened, and he turned to Makoto to tell her that he really needed to take care of her. But instead came a simple, almost hesitant greeting. "Oh, good morning, Makoto." Her eyes widened in disbelief, a blush rose on her cheeks. She demanded to know what he had just said, unable to believe that he had simply greeted her in the morning. Their conversation caught the coach's attention, who even exclaimed how lively they were. Makoto firmly denied it, and her Rushage, completely confused, asked aloud if he had said something strange. He turned and greeted the coach. "Oh, good morning, Sakurako," seeing that their group had gathered, and said it was time to set off. The preparation of his group led them to a sturdy building with stone walls, above which hung a large wooden sign reading Yatsukumasha. Inside, the owner solemnly handed her student a luxurious katana, Sakura Flash, an 8-star takai, the best weapon she had ever forged, with abilities like health regeneration, attack boost, and a mysterious ability release. The coach was impressed and enthusiastically noted his incredible 8-star rating. The shopkeeper, after taking a drag from her cigarette, then asked her about the strange ability release skill. She admitted that this ability was a mystery to her. When she finished the blade, it was not there, and she assumed it might have been given precisely because the coach was the one destined to wield it. The shopkeeper suggested testing it on a mannequin, saying at least it didn't seem like a debuff, but the coach confidently refused. She didn't need it, she liked the weapon as it was. As she held the blade, Hiroshige's thoughts returned to Sakurako. He imagined the two-headed horned monster they had hunted and realized that with this weapon, she might finally be able to cut off its head. When the deal was concluded, the shopkeeper noticed her rushage in Makoto and called the pair over. She told them that as her regulars, losing them would be a real loss, and her stern expression softened. She simply, from the bottom of her heart, ordered, "Come back alive." With his new equipment, Hiroshige looks ahead with renewed determination, and beside him Makoto nods happily and energetically says yes. He decisively pushes the heavy wooden doors leading beyond the market. Turning back to the coach, she says that now they only have to finish shopping, and clenching her fist with excitement, adds that after this the Shinjuku dungeon awaits them. Preparation is complete. The three stand at the threshold of the cave, and the entrance to the dungeon looms before them. Inside, they are immediately attacked by terrible many-legged insect-like creatures. Hiroshige draws his new blade Sakura Flash, and the coach rushes into battle, her weapon the blurred glow of movement. After the lightning-fast clash, the group froze. Seriousness was fixed on their faces, and everyone carefully examined the path ahead. They ventured deeper into the stone corridors of the dungeon until they found a small clearing. They made a small fire to rest a little. They reached the 70th floor, and Grushage decided that today they would camp here. He turned to Makoto by the fire, noted that they had been in the Shinjuku dungeon for 2 days already, and asked how she felt physically. She replied that she hadn't noticed anything specific, but her body felt a bit heavy. The coach with a ponytail remarks, "Nothing strange. Fatigue accumulates quickly if you stay long in a cave dungeon." Hearing this, Makoto lowers her eyes and apologizes for slowing the team. He quickly reassures her, "Don't worry, we will go slowly because each of our health is the most important." He adds that their pace is also not bad. You can see him sigh with relief, and Makoto raises her head and says she is glad to hear that. He looked into the dungeon corridor and said with satisfaction that they had finally caught up with them. Suddenly, another squad emerges from the darkness. Kenzaki Leon, leader of the Absolute Knights, strides forward in full armor, followed by guild members. Hiroshige and Makoto froze in surprise, while the trainer narrowed her eyes and demanded to know what Leon wanted. A proud smile blooms on Leon's face, and he calmly replies, "What do I want? Isn't it obvious?" Somewhere in a room filled with secret symbols, a woman in a decorated hat and cloak holds a glowing artifact and says that everything is going according to her will. The Absolute Knights charged into battle against the mage's team, and suddenly Asus Akimokoto and Hiroshi Yamamoto found themselves bound by shining magical chains, their faces frozen in shock and astonishment. Their companion, the trainer, looks ahead, her eyes narrowed with fury over the sudden ambush. Her gaze falls on Kenzaki Leon standing by the mage and warrior. He smiles, addresses her directly, and says he has come to take her back, calling her Sakurako. The woman, now called Sakurako, glanced over her shoulder at the bound friends, recognized them as Absolute Knights, and asked Leon if he really wanted her to rejoin his team. Helpless, Makoto and Hiroshige can only watch as tense negotiations unfold around their fate. Leon extends an open palm to her, as if offering to talk, then sets a condition. If she agrees to return and rejoin his squad, he will spare their lives. The path to the ultimatum loomed over the two prisoners, their faces bore grim expressions. He looks at her with a condescending smile and says she has fallen too low. Sakurako's face hardens as she utters his name. Leon dismisses her anger, says he is not mistaken about her situation, and insists he only thinks about what is best for her. She listened as Kenzaki Leon approached, and his words dripped with arrogance. He said that such a beautiful and strong woman as she should have a strong and handsome man by her side, someone like him. He extended his glove to her and insisted that together, side by side, they would look much better, especially in front of the cameras. Her expression remained cold and completely unimpressed. She sharply replied that from the very beginning he only cared about appearances. In a cutting tone, she advised him to train more until his knees wouldn't fail him again before the Usura ogre. The sharp remark hit him deeply. Kenzaki Leon faltered, his face twisted with anger, and he insisted that they had only retreated then due to a lack of supplies. His voice burst into a shout that echoed through the stone hall. He declared himself the strongest and boasted that with his current preparation, the formidable floor bosses were now nothing to him. While his tirade continued, the bound Hiroshige silently listened, his face gloomy, and the other members of the Absolute Knights, Mika and Idachi, watched the scene unfold. The sorceress Megumi Katori noticed that all levels were above 90, she had 96, and the warrior Desan Lee had 90, and with concern realized they could not be tamed. She had neither SP nor time for such a skill. Lying on the floor, Hiroshige understood the bitter truth. If a fight started, it would end badly for him, Sakurako, and Makoto. They had no chance against Kenzaki Leon and his formidable high-level allies. Hiroshige remained bound in chains, while Kenzaki Leon loomed over him demanding a decision. The knight asked what he would do, allow 2 of his companions to die or finally agree to return. Despite the hopelessness, Hiroshige gritted his teeth and knew he had to try something. Kenzaki Leon pointed his finger directly at him, his face twisted into a mocking grimace, and he called Grushage nothing but a laughingstock. Mage Megumi Katori picked up on this thought. Her voice breathing contempt, she challenged what her comrade had just said. mocking him for calling himself the strongest when he was clearly trembling with fear over the loss of his party members. Sakurako added her sharp comment. If he was truly the strongest, then even with the current party he would have challenged the Usura ogre, and her words were so sharp that Kanzaki Leon, irritated, sharply told her to shut up. Warrior Adachi intervened. Hiroshichi could pretend to be tough as much as he wanted, but without Sakurako he was nothing. He insisted, asking what exactly Hiroshichi could do on his own. Half of the face hidden in shadow, Kanzaki Leon delivered his final verdict, and said that the real truth is that Hiroshichi is incredibly weak. The insult finally broke Hiroshichi's restraint. He roared for them to be silent, accusing them of wanting to bring back Sakurako only so that she would defeat the boss for them. In response to the outburst, Kanzaki Leon acted without hesitation. He plunged the tip of his sword into Hiroshichi's thigh. When the blade passed through the flesh, Makoto screamed his name in horror, and Hiroshichi's face contorted with shock and pain. While he suffers from the knife wound, Sakurako's face twisted with rage. She swiftly draws her katana and points the blade at Kanzaki Leon's throat. He flinches in surprise and asks to wait, and she, boiling with anger, calls him a bastard. Despite the burning pain, Hiroshichi looks up from the floor, sweat dripping down his face, and defiantly asks Kanzaki, "Did you really believe that such a strike could kill me?" His boasting was met with contempt. Kanzaki looks down on him and says that if this is all he is capable of, it is no wonder he cannot defeat the level 4 boss. To emphasize the insult, Kanzaki fiercely pulls the sword from Hiroshichi's leg, disgust on his face, and calls him a cheeky brat. His words were cut off by Hiroshichi's painful scream, and Kanzaki does not calm down, shouting that Hiroshichi is just a hostage kept alive only by his whim. He leans closer, his voice thundering with arrogance, demanding to know why Hiroshichi thinks that without Sakurako he cannot challenge the boss, and proclaims himself the strongest warrior in the world. He boasts that he can conquer such a dungeon whenever he wants. With a sharp gaze, he throws a direct challenge to Hiroshichi, "Prove your worth here and now." The rules of the trial are simple. Hiroshichi must defeat the boss of the 90th floor, Ashura Ogre, without any help from Sakurako. Hearing this, Hiroshichi's face hardened. The image of the six-armed demon instantly appeared in his mind. He listened, sweat running down his forehead, while Kanzaki Leon's challenge echoed in his head. "Defeat Ashura Ogre, not only will you be recognized, but Sakurako will be yours." His hesitation was palpable in the air. Kanzaki pressed him with a sly smile, leading to the thought that the task might be impossible. And the entire burden of the trial fell on Hiroshichi's shoulders. He only wondered how to defeat such a monster. A wave of defiance pushed away his doubts. Hiroshichi's face tightened, and Kanzaki suddenly slammed his sword on the stone floor. Pressing the chain with his feet, he roared that nothing was impossible for him. He would defeat the Ashura Ogre and prove that he was the strongest. While Hiroshichi's vow hung in the air, Kanzaki turned to Megumi and Adachi and said it was time to go, and Hiroshichi weakly agreed from the floor. He watched them leave while he remained chained to the dungeon floor. Only one thought spun in his head: they could at least remove the chains before leaving him. He lay helpless on the cold stone when suddenly a sharp metallic sound cut the silence. Sakurako stood over him, her blade already in its sheath after cutting his bonds. And from the ground his Ushige raised his head and whispered thanks. As soon as he was freed, the confused Asazakai Makoto grabbed him in an embrace, crying his name, asking if he was okay and insisting they needed a potion, while her Ushige, overwhelmed and in pain, begged her not to shake him. He barely got to his feet, panting from exhaustion. Sakurako stood nearby and calmly, calling him by name, advised him to stop provoking people so recklessly it was bad for the heart. He awkwardly raised his eyes, and Makoto, with eyes wide open in disbelief, demanded to know if he was taken on purpose. He only barely agreed, admitting he himself was surprised how everything happened so suddenly. His thought was simple. He wanted to avoid a serious fight, explained that he did not want anyone to get hurt, so he decided the best thing was to allow himself to be taken. Sakurako interrupted him. Yes, she admitted he ran away wounded and a simple potion could heal his wounds, but her voice carried firm disapproval of his methods. She did not avert her stern gaze and told him that taking such huge risks alone was not a good thing. Makoto quickly agreed and reminded her in her haste that he personally stated everyone's safety above all. Her words struck him when she pointed out that he too was part of it all. He bowed his head and quietly apologized, acknowledging their correctness, while Sakurako and Makoto looked at him with unwavering expressions. But suddenly he raised his gaze hard as stone, declared that he was the squad leader, their boss, and did so because he believed a leader must protect his people. He stood before his teammates when Makoto, though it was strange for her to say, admitted she was proud that he was the one protecting her. But Sakurako was dissatisfied. She sternly ordered him never to do anything so reckless again. After her outburst, she quickly apologized for her tone but insisted that he promise her that. A memory suddenly surfaced in her mind. Her older brother said that his job was to protect his younger sister, and as long as she was safe, that was enough for him. Returning to reality, Sakurako looked at Hiroshichi with a mixture of irritation and understanding and said he was a real weirdo. He just looked back, embarrassed by her sudden change. Rashid then apologized to Makoto, explaining that he acted on impulse, and worried Makoto asked if Sakurako would now have to leave their party. He reassured her not to worry, and Makoto resolutely declared that if it came to that, she would resist with all her might. At that moment, Sakurako stepped forward and confidently said that her place was right here, in Hiroside's party. The tension disappeared and the team became united again. Hiroside smiled. He announced they would rest today and give their all again tomorrow, and the comrades gladly supported this.